Parkinson's law. You have 2 weeks to finish a report. It should take 3 hours. But somehow, by day 13, you're still adjusting fonts, rewriting the introduction, debating whether the conclusion needs another paragraph. The deadline arrives. You finish exactly on time, exhausted, convinced it couldn't have been done any faster. Here's what happened. The work expanded to fill the time you gave it. This is Parkinson's law. Work stretches to occupy whatever time is available for its completion. The task didn't require 2 weeks. 2 weeks were available, so 2 weeks were used. The extra time didn't improve quality. It just gave room for hesitation, overthinking, and unnecessary complexity. The mechanism is brutal. When time feels abundant, urgency disappears. Without urgency, focus scatters. You check email between paragraphs. You rewrite sentences that were fine the first time. You convince yourself more research is needed, that the structure could be better, that perfection is just one more revision away. The deadline stops being a finish line. It becomes a vague horizon you'll reach eventually. It happens everywhere. A 30-minute meeting scheduled for an hour takes the full hour, even when the decision was clear 15 minutes in. Give a department extra budget and they'll spend it. Not because the work demands it, because the money is there. Your closet fills whatever space you give it. The moment you add storage, it fills again. Entire organizations operate this way. Projects balloon. Teams expand to match headcount. Government initiatives that could launch in months stretch into years. Universities take decades to complete buildings that private developers finish in 2. Bureaucracies layer on approvals and documentation that add nothing but time. The work doesn't demand it. The structure allows it. The irony cuts deep. Tighter constraints often produce better results. A report due in 3 hours gets written in 3 hours, sharper and cleaner. The same person who spent 2 weeks on a project could have finished in a fraction of the time. Pressure forces decisions. Scarcity cuts waste. The deadline becomes a tool, not a threat. Parkinson's law doesn't mean you should always work under crushing time pressure. It means that time left unmanaged becomes an invitation for inefficiency. The work will take as long as you let it. And if you let it, it will take everything you give. Pareto Principle. She was brilliant. Fast, reliable, outstanding with clients. So naturally she got promoted. Now she manages 15 people, and she's drowning. The skills that made her exceptional, attention to detail, personal accountability, direct client work, don't translate. She micromanages because she can't delegate. Strategic decisions paralyze her. Meetings drain her. Everyone sees it, including her. This is the Pareto Principle. People rise to their level of incompetence. You get promoted because you're good at what you do. The new role requires different skills. If you don't have them, you stop rising. You stay in a position you're not equipped for, performing below your previous success. The logic is mechanical. Organizations promote based on current performance, not future capability. Great salesperson becomes sales manager. Great teacher becomes principal. Talented engineer moves into leadership. Each promotion rewards what you've already done, not what you'll do next. Each step up introduces demands that weren't tested before the move happened. The trap is structural. Competence in one role doesn't guarantee competence in the next. A surgeon's precision doesn't make them a good hospital administrator. A journalist's writing skill doesn't translate to editorial leadership. A software developer's technical brilliance doesn't mean they can manage people. The skills are different. The pressures are different. The role is different. But the promotion happens anyway. And once you hit that level, you stay there. You don't get demoted for struggling. You don't move back to where you thrived. Organizations rarely reverse promotions. So you remain in a position you're not suited for, doing work you're not good at, while the role you excelled in goes to someone else. The system doesn't correct itself. It stalls. It's everywhere. Managers who are brilliant individual contributors but can't lead. Executives promoted for operational skill who lack strategic vision. Department heads chosen for technical expertise who struggle with people. Military officers who were excellent tacticians failing at strategic command. Cooks who were star players unable to develop talent. Politicians who were effective legislators drowning in executive roles. The pattern repeats because the system keeps promoting the same way. It rewards past performance without evaluating future fit. The structure treats every high performer as leadership material, even when leadership requires an entirely different skill set. And the cost isn't just personal. Entire teams operate under leaders who weren't selected for leadership ability. Decisions get made by people promoted past their competence. The system continues, producing exactly what it's designed to produce: layers of people operating just beyond their capability, held in place by a structure that can't adapt. Murphy's Law. The presentation is in 10 minutes. You've rehearsed it a dozen times. The file opens perfectly on your laptop. You walk into the conference room, plug in the cable, and the screen goes black. Your laptop won't connect. The backup won't load. 3 executives are watching you fumble with settings while the clock runs. Finally, it works. But now you're rattled, off rhythm, and the whole thing feels like damage control. Why does it always happen like this? Why do things break at the worst possible moment? They don't. That's Murphy's Law, the perception that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But it's not some cosmic conspiracy. It's probability meeting human psychology. Things go wrong all the time. Most of the time, it doesn't matter. The cable fails when you're testing it alone in your office. The backup corrupts on a random Tuesday. But those moments don't register. They're forgettable. When failure happens at a critical moment, it burns into memory. Your brain tags it as significant. And that's what you remember. The effect compounds because high-stakes moments already carry more risk. You're stressed. You're moving faster. You're doing things you don't normally do. Presenting to executives means using unfamiliar equipment in an unfamiliar room. Flying to an interview means relying on tight connections, weather, and airport systems. The more critical the situation, the more dependencies you introduce. And every dependency is a chance for failure. It shows up everywhere. The fire alarm goes off during your most important phone call. Your car breaks down the day of a job interview. The internet crashes right before a deadline. Software updates force a restart in the middle of critical work. A decade-old reliable system fails the one time you desperately need it. The pattern feels personal, like the universe is targeting you. But it's not. You just notice it more when it costs you something. What makes Murphy's Law stick isn't that bad things always happen. It's that when they do, they hurt. And pain is what memory holds on to. The 100 times the cable worked dissolve into background noise. The one time it failed becomes the story you tell. That asymmetry warps perception. Failure feels inevitable because success is invisible. Murphy's Law isn't a rule. It's a reminder. Critical systems fail. Tight schedules break. Dependencies multiply risk. The question isn't whether something will go wrong. It's whether you built in enough margin to survive it when it does. Goodhart's Law. The call center hit every target. Average call time dropped. Resolution rates climbed. Customer satisfaction scores were the highest in years. Management celebrated. Bonuses were distributed. Then the complaints started flooding in. Customers were being transferred mid-sentence. Problems weren't actually being solved, just marked as resolved. Surveys were being gamed with leading questions. The numbers looked perfect. The service was collapsing. When a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. That's Goodhart's Law, and it destroys more systems than most people realize. The principle is simple. You can't directly measure the thing you care about, so you pick a proxy. something easier to track. Then you incentivize people to hit that number. And the moment you do, the number becomes the goal, not the outcome it was supposed to represent. The metric. It happens because humans optimize. You want good customer service. You measure call time. Now employees optimize for call time. They rush conversations. They cut corners. They prioritize speed over solutions. The metric improves. The actual service degrades. The number climbs while the thing you cared about dies. Education is drowning in this. Standardized test scores became the measure of learning, so schools started teaching to the test. Curriculum narrowed. Critical thinking disappeared. Students learned how to pass tests, not how to think. Scores went up. Education quality collapsed. The metric succeeded. The goal failed. Healthcare does it with patient throughput. More patients per hour looks like efficiency. So doctors spend less time per patient. Diagnoses get rushed. Preventive care vanishes. Treatment becomes transactional. The numbers look good. The care suffers. Hospitals hit their targets while patients fall through cracks that didn't used to exist. Corporations do it with quarterly earnings. Stock price becomes the metric. So companies cut research, delay maintenance, reduce quality, and buy back shares. Short-term numbers soar. Long-term value erodes. The market rewards the metric. The business rots from the inside. Even police departments aren't immune. Crime statistics become the target. So arrests go up for minor offenses. Serious crimes get downgraded to make numbers look better. Reports get manipulated. The data says crime is falling. The streets tell a different story. Goodhart's law isn't about bad intentions. It's about misaligned incentives. The moment you turn a measurement into a goal, you change what people optimize for. And what they optimize for is the number, not the reason the number mattered in the first place. The metric becomes the mission, and the mission gets lost. Matthew Effect. Two researchers publish similar studies. Both are solid work. One is at Harvard. The other is at a small state university. The Harvard paper gets cited hundreds of times. Conference invitations follow. Funding flows in. The other paper gets 3 citations. No invitations, no funding, same quality. Different outcome. The rich get richer. The poor get poorer. Success doesn't just reward itself, it multiplies. This is the Matthew Effect, named after a line in the Bible. For to everyone who has, more will be given. It's the principle that advantage accumulates. Early success creates visibility. Visibility creates opportunity. Opportunity creates more success. The cycle reinforces itself, and the gap widens not because of merit, but because of momentum. It works through perception. People assume that what's already successful must be good. A book that's already selling gets more attention. A researcher who's already cited gets cited again. A startup that already raised funding finds it easier to raise more. Success signals quality, even when the signal is noise. And once that perception locks in, it becomes self-fulfilling. Social proof accelerates it. The restaurant with a line out the door attracts more customers. The artist with 1 million followers gains followers faster. The actor who's already famous gets cast in bigger roles. Popularity compounds popularity. Not because the work is necessarily better, because visibility creates more visibility. It's everywhere. Tech companies that hit critical mass attract the best talent, which makes them more successful, which attracts more talent. Authors who land on bestseller lists get bookstore placement, which drives more sales, which keeps them on the list. Musicians who get early radio play build fanbases that demand more radio play. The advantage feeds itself. Even science isn't immune. The most prestigious journals publish researchers from prestigious institutions whose work gets more attention, which makes them more prestigious, which gets them published in prestigious journals. The cycle entrenches. Brilliant work from unknown researchers gets buried. Mediocre work from famous names gets amplified. The system rewards the signal of success more than the substance. Social media turned this into an engine. Accounts with more followers get shown to more people. Posts with early engagement get boosted by algorithms. Virality creates more virality. A small initial advantage, sometimes random, snowballs into massive disparity. Two identical posts, one gets seen, the other disappears. The difference wasn't quality. It was timing, luck, and algorithmic momentum. The Matthew effect doesn't mean the successful don't deserve success. It means that success creates conditions for more success independent of continued merit. Early wins compound. Early losses compound. And the distance between them grows, not because the gap in ability is widening, but because the system amplifies whatever advantage already exists. Lindy Effect. A new productivity app launches with revolutionary features. Everyone's talking about it. 6 months later, it's abandoned, replaced by the next revolutionary app. Meanwhile, email, invented decades ago, is still how the world communicates. Pencils, books, basic arithmetic, they've lasted centuries. The new thing feels like the future. But the old thing is more likely to survive. The longer something has existed, the longer it's likely to continue existing. This is the Lindy Effect, and it inverts how most people think about lifespan. A new technology feels fragile because it's unproven. But that's backward. Time is the test. Every year something survives is evidence it can survive another. The app that's been around for a month might last another month. The tool that's been around for 50 years will probably last 50 more. Longevity predicts longevity. It works because survival requires adaptation. Things that last have already navigated changes. They've survived competitors, shifting trends, technological disruption, and user indifference. They've been tested. They've adapted. That history of survival is information. It tells you the thing has properties that resist obsolescence. Not forever, but longer than something untested. Ideas follow the same pattern. Philosophies that have persisted for thousands of years, Stoicism, basic ethics, logic, will probably persist for thousands more. Not because they're perfect, because they've already survived endless challenges. A trendy self-help framework that's 6 months old might be forgotten in 6 months. Aristotle is still assigned in universities. Time filtered out the noise. Books too. Novels published last year face enormous odds of being forgotten. Classics from centuries ago are still read. Not because they're necessarily better, because they've been tested by generations of readers, translated into dozens of languages, survived cultural shifts and changing tastes. They've proven durability. A bestseller today might vanish tomorrow. Shakespeare isn't going anywhere. Even institutions follow this. Democracies that have lasted centuries are more likely to last than new democracies. Not because age makes them better, because they've weathered crises, adapted to change, and survived challenges that killed others. Longevity is evidence of robustness. The longer something has worked, the more likely it is to keep working. Technology inverts this. The newest gadget feels cutting edge, but most new technology dies quickly. The average app lasts months. The average startup fails within years. The technology that lasts tends to be boring. Command lines, spreadsheets, text files. They've survived because they solve fundamental problems in simple, adaptable ways. Flashy innovation often dies. Simple, proven tools endure. The Lindy Effect doesn't guarantee immortality. It's probabilistic. Things eventually die. But it shifts the odds. A trend that's been around for a year has a decent chance of another year. A tradition that's been around for a century has a good chance of another century. Time is the filter. And what survives time has something the new thing hasn't proven yet: the ability to last. Hanlon's razor. Your colleague didn't respond to your email. 3 days pass. You start building a case. They're ignoring you on purpose. They're trying to undermine your project. They're positioning themselves to take credit for your work. By the time they finally reply with "sorry, it went to spam," you've already constructed an entire conspiracy. Why do we jump to malice when incompetence is usually the answer? Hanlon's razor cuts through this. Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. Or more generously, by mistake, oversight, or simple human error. The principle isn't about calling people stupid. It's about recognizing that most harm comes from incompetence, not intent. People mess up. Systems fail. Communication breaks. And none of it requires a villain. The urge to assume malice is strong because it makes sense of chaos. If someone is actively working against you, that's a story. It has motive. It has agency. It feels like you can do something about it. But if it's just a mistake, there's no narrative. Just randomness. And randomness feels harder to accept. It shows up everywhere. A company raises prices. Customers assume greed and conspiracy. More often, it's clumsy cost management or poor communication. A politician makes a damaging decision. Opponents assume corruption. Sometimes it's just bad judgment or insufficient information. A friend cancels plans last minute. You assume they don't care. Usually, they're just overwhelmed. Online, it's worse. Someone posts something you disagree with. The assumption isn't that they're misinformed or thinking differently. It's that they're deliberately spreading lies, pushing an agenda, acting in bad faith. The internet runs on this. Every mistake gets interpreted as malice. Every error becomes evidence of conspiracy. Nuance disappears. Intent gets assumed. The cost is exhaustion. Assuming malice means assuming enemies. Every interaction becomes adversarial. Every mistake becomes an attack. You're constantly defending, constantly suspicious, constantly building cases against people who were just careless or confused. It's draining. And most of the time it's wrong. Hanlon's razor doesn't mean malice never exists. It does, but it's rarer than we think. Incompetence, distraction, misunderstanding, these are everywhere. They're the default. Malice takes effort. Stupidity is free. And in a world where everyone is overworked, distracted, and managing too much information, mistakes are inevitable. Assuming intent just makes you see enemies where there are only people struggling to keep up. Hick's Law. You open the menu. 47 options. Appetizers and trees, sides, specials, seasonal dishes, build your own combinations. You came in hungry. Now you're paralyzed. The waiter asks if you're ready. You're not. You scan again. Nothing jumps out. Everything looks fine. Nothing feels right. 10 minutes later, you're still staring at the same page. No closer to deciding than when you started. The more choices you have, the longer it takes to choose. This is Hick's Law. Decision time increases logarithmically with the number of options. Double the choices and the time to decide doesn't just double. It compounds. Each new option adds comparison cost. Your brain has to evaluate it, weigh it against the others, reconsider previous judgments. The cognitive load stacks. And at some point, the process stops being helpful and starts being paralyzing. The effect is mechanical. Every choice introduces friction. 2 options means 1 comparison. 5 options means 10 comparisons. 10 options means 45. The math scales brutally. And that's assuming each option is equally weighted and clearly defined. When options overlap, when they're vaguely described, when the differences are subtle, the comparisons get harder. The time expands. It's everywhere in design. Websites with too many navigation options lose users. Apps with cluttered interfaces frustrate people. Streaming services with infinite libraries lead to more browsing than watching. The paradox is that more choice feels like freedom, but it often results in less action. People want options. But they also want decisions to be easy. And those two goals conflict. Businesses stumble into this constantly. Offering more products seems like better service. But customers don't want 100 variations of the same thing. They want a few clear, distinct options. Restaurants with massive menus see slower table turnover. Retailers with endless SKUs see lower conversion rates. The abundance creates hesitation. And hesitation kills decisions. Even simple interactions suffer. An email with 5 possible meeting times takes longer to respond to than one with 2. A form with 20 fields gets abandoned more than one with 5. A remote control with 40 buttons confuses more than one with 10. Each additional option is a tax on attention. And attention is finite. Hick's law doesn't mean choice is bad. It means that beyond a certain point, more choice stops improving outcomes and starts degrading them. The sweet spot isn't maximum options. It's enough options to feel like there's real choice, but few enough that the decision feels manageable. Too few and it feels restrictive. Too many and it feels overwhelming. The goal is the middle. And most systems overshoot. Occam's razor. A patient comes in with a headache, fatigue, and dizziness. One doctor starts building a theory. It could be a rare neurological disorder, complicated by a vitamin deficiency, possibly triggered by an undiagnosed autoimmune condition. Another doctor checks the basics. Dehydration. The patient hadn't been drinking enough water. Both explanations fit the symptoms. One requires exotic conditions aligning perfectly. The other requires forgetting to hydrate. The simplest explanation is usually the right one. That's Occam's razor, and it's not about dumbing things down. It's about not multiplying assumptions. When 2 explanations both account for the evidence, the one requiring fewer leaps is more likely correct. Not because simple is always true, because every additional assumption is a place where you could be wrong. The more parts in your theory, the more chances for one of those parts to fail. It works because reality doesn't favor complexity. Nature follows paths of least resistance. Systems evolve toward efficiency. Convoluted explanations often signal overthinking, not insight. When you need 5 unlikely things to align for your theory to work, you're probably wrong. When your explanation relies on one common thing, you're probably close. Conspiracy theories violate this constantly. A scandal breaks. The simple explanation is incompetence or bad judgment. But that's boring. So the theory expands. It wasn't incompetence. It was a coordinated cover-up involving dozens of people across multiple institutions, all keeping perfect silence. The more elaborate version feels more interesting. But it requires far more assumptions. Every conspirator who doesn't talk. Every leak that doesn't happen. Every piece of evidence that stays hidden. Each one is an assumption. And assumptions stack risk. Medicine relies on this. When diagnosing, doctors are taught, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Common conditions are common. Rare diseases are rare. A headache is more likely stress or dehydration than a brain tumor. Not because tumors don't exist. Because statistically, they're far less frequent. Jumping to the exotic explanation wastes time, resources, and often causes harm through unnecessary tests and treatments. Science uses it as a filter. 2 theories explain the data. One requires inventing new particles, new forces, and new laws of physics. The other works within established physics. Scientists don't reject the complex theory automatically, but they demand stronger evidence for it. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Occam's razor isn't a law of nature. It's a heuristic for navigating uncertainty. Even daily problem-solving benefits. Your car won't start. You could assume the alternator failed, the battery corroded, and the starter motor seized simultaneously. Or you could check if you left the lights on. Both explain a dead car. One requires multiple failures. The other requires one mistake. Check the simple thing first. Occam's razor doesn't guarantee truth. Sometimes the complex explanation is correct. But as a starting point, as a filter for where to look first, simplicity wins more often than complexity. Not because the universe is simple, because unnecessary complexity is usually a sign you're overthinking. Sturgeon's law. You try a new streaming service. 20 highly rated shows everyone's talking about. You pick one. Pick. It's terrible. You try another. Worse. A third. Barely watchable. You start wondering if standards have collapsed, if quality is dead, if everything's worse now. Then you remember the shows you loved last year. They were also from streaming services. They were also mixed in with dozens of mediocre ones you never finished. 90% of everything is garbage. That's Sturgeon's law, and it's not cynicism. It's statistics. Most output in any field is mediocre. A few things are great. A few are terrible. The vast majority is forgettable. Not because people aren't trying. Because creating something excellent is hard. Most attempts fall short. And that's been true forever. The perception that quality has declined is a filtering problem. You remember the good stuff from the past. The bad stuff faded. The forgettable got forgotten. So when you compare today's output to yesterday's, you're comparing everything now to only the survivors then. It's not a fair comparison. The past had just as much mediocrity. You just don't see it anymore. Books work this way. Walk into a bookstore. Thousands of titles. Most won't be remembered in 5 years. A handful will become classics. But in 1950, the same ratio held. Thousands of books published. Most forgotten. A few survived. We read those survivors now and think they made better books back then. No. They made the same mix. Time filtered out the noise. Music follows the pattern. Every decade, people say music used to be better. But the past didn't produce only Beatles and Bowie. It produced thousands of forgotten bands, one-hit wonders and albums that flopped. The good stuff stuck. The rest disappeared. Streaming just makes the mediocrity visible again. Before, you heard curated radio and bought albums people recommended. Now you have access to everything. Which means you have access to the 90%. The internet amplified this. Before, gatekeepers filtered. Publishers rejected most manuscripts. Record labels passed on most demos. Studios greenlit a fraction of pitches. The bar wasn't quality. It was marketability. But it still filtered. Now, anyone can publish, upload, release. The gate is open. Which means the ratio is visible. You see the 90% that used to get filtered out before it reached you. The effect is exhausting. Endless mediocrity makes discovery harder. Finding the good stuff requires wading through more noise. But the good stuff still exists. The ratio hasn't changed. There's just more volume. More total output means more great work and more garbage. The percentages hold. The absolute numbers grow. Sturgeon's law isn't a complaint. It's a reminder. Most things aren't great. That's normal. Expecting otherwise sets you up for constant disappointment. The goal isn't to find a field where everything is good. It's to get better at filtering, to find the 10% faster, and to stop being surprised when most things are just okay. Pareto Principle. A sales team tracks performance. 5 reps out of 25 generate 70% of revenue. The rest contribute the remaining 30. Management wants balanced performance, but the pattern won't budge. No matter how they train, coach, or restructure, the distribution stays skewed. A small group drives most of the results. The majority contributes, but not equally. 80% of outcomes come from 20% of inputs. This is the Pareto Principle, and it's everywhere. Not always exactly 80-20, but close enough that the imbalance is the rule, not the exception. A few customers generate most profit. A few products drive most sales. A few employees create most value. A few features get most usage. The distribution is never even. It's always skewed. The pattern holds because effort and impact don't scale linearly. Doubling effort doesn't double results. Some actions produce vastly more output than others. Some customers are worth 10 times more than average. Some products have 10 times the margin. Some bugs cause 10 times the support tickets. Identifying which ones is the skill, because treating everything equally wastes resources. It shows up in business constantly. Software companies discover that a tiny fraction of features drive most engagement. The rest get ignored, but development resources were split evenly across all features. The result is wasted effort on things nobody uses. Smart teams cut the low-impact features and double down on the vital few. Productivity jumps. Wealth follows this. A small percentage of people hold a vast percentage of assets. Not because the system is fair or unfair, because wealth compounds. Early advantages multiply. Success creates conditions for more success. The distribution curve bends. A few end up with most. The many split the rest. The same pattern appears in income, in property ownership, in investment returns. Even personal productivity operates this way. Most of your results come from a small portion of your actions. A few tasks matter. Most are filler. A few relationships are critical. Most are peripheral. A few skills drive your career. Most are nice to have. Identifying the 20% is the difference between spinning and progressing. The trap is treating everything as equal priority, spending the same time on high-impact and low-impact work, giving the same attention to major clients and minor ones, allocating the same budget to top products and duds. It feels fair, but it's inefficient. The 80% of effort spent on low-return activities could be relocated to the 20% that actually moves the needle. The Pareto Principle isn't an excuse for inequality. It's a description of how systems distribute outcomes. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The few that matter. The many that don't. The imbalance is structural. The question is whether you're spending your resources on the right 20%, or scattering them evenly across everything and wondering why results stay flat. Dunning-Kruger Effect. He's been learning guitar for 3 weeks. He can play 2 chords. He's already talking about forming a band, recording an album, maybe touring. His confidence is sky high. Meanwhile, the musician who's been playing for 20 years is hesitant, second-guessing every note, convinced she's still not good enough. The beginner thinks he's nearly there. The expert thinks she's barely started. The less you know, the more confident you are. This is the Dunning-Kruger Effect, and it's brutal. Incompetence doesn't just limit your ability. It limits your ability to recognize your own incompetence. You lack the skill to do the thing well. But you also lack the skill to judge whether you're doing it well. So you feel confident, not despite being bad. Because you're bad. The mechanism is simple. Expertise requires seeing nuance, understanding complexity, recognizing what you don't know. Beginners don't have that yet. They see the surface. It looks manageable. They learn a few basics and feel like they've cracked it. They don't know what they're missing because they don't know enough to see the gaps. The mountain looks small because they're standing at the bottom and can't see past the first hill. It shows up everywhere. Someone takes an online course on investing and starts giving financial advice. They learn the basics. They don't realize the basics are 5% of what matters. Someone reads a few articles about psychology and diagnoses everyone around them. They know the terms. They don't know the context, the exceptions, the complexity that makes diagnosis hard even for professionals. Online arguments are fueled by this. People with surface-level knowledge debate experts with confidence. The expert hedges qualifies, acknowledges nuance. The novice speaks in certainties. To observers, the novice often sounds more convincing. Confidence reads as competence. Doubt reads as weakness. But the doubt is the sign of expertise. The certainty is the sign of ignorance. The curve is predictable. Beginners start confident. They learn a little and feel like they've learned a lot. Then, if they keep going, reality hits. They realize how much they don't know. Confidence crashes. This is the valley of despair, the point where most people quit. The ones who push through start building real competence. And slowly, gradually, their confidence rebuilds. But this time it's calibrated. They know what they know. They know what they don't. The confidence is earned, not assumed. The effect isn't limited to skills. It applies to judgment. People with no experience in a field feel qualified to dismiss experts. It's just common sense. But what looks like common sense to an outsider is often a simplification that misses critical variables. The expert sees those variables. The novice doesn't. And the novice mistakes their blindness for clarity. The Dunning-Kruger Effect doesn't mean beginners should never speak. It means confidence and competence don't track the way we think they do. Early confidence is often ignorance disguised. Real competence comes with doubt, with awareness of complexity, with recognition of what you still don't understand. If someone is absolutely certain, especially early on, they probably don't know enough yet to realize how much they're missing. Abilene Paradox. The team gathers for a planning meeting. Someone suggests a new initiative. Nobody thinks it's a good idea. But nobody says so. One person nods politely. Another adds a cautious "sure, could work." The silence is interpreted as agreement. The decision passes. Everyone commits to something nobody wanted. Months later, when the project collapses, they finally admit the truth. None of them thought it would work. They all went along because they thought everyone else wanted it. A group decides to do something no individual member actually wants. That's the Abilene Paradox, and it's more common than anyone admits. It happens when everyone assumes everyone else agrees, so nobody speaks up. The group moves forward on a choice that contradicts what each person privately believes. Not because anyone pushed for it. Because nobody pushed back. The mechanism is fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of being the outlier. Fear of being difficult. So instead of voicing doubt, people stay quiet. Or worse, they add weak support. A nod. Sounds fine. Let's try it. And those small signals get interpreted as consensus. The group mistakes silence for agreement. And once that happens, momentum builds. The bad idea gains legitimacy just by not being challenged. It shows up in families. Nobody wants to go to the reunion, but everyone assumes someone else does, so they all go. Nobody enjoys it. Everyone resents it. But the decision was made collectively, through a series of unspoken assumptions and polite non-objections. In corporate settings, it's worse. Teams greenlight projects nobody believes in. They allocate budgets to ideas nobody supports. They restructure departments in ways nobody thinks will work. But nobody wants to be the person who derails the meeting. Nobody wants to seem negative or resistant. So they go along. And the bad decision becomes official, ratified by a room full of people who privately disagree. The cost is wasted effort. Resources spent on initiatives that were doomed from the start because they never had real support. But because nobody voiced opposition early, the failure gets blamed on execution, not the idea. We tried. It just didn't work out. No. It didn't work out because nobody wanted it to begin with. The group just never said so out loud. The fix is simple but uncomfortable. Say what you actually think. Ask if others agree. Test assumptions. Because the alternative is worse. A group of people, all silently convinced they're the only one with doubts, marching together towards something none of them want. Paradox of choice. You spend 20 minutes scrolling through streaming options. Hundreds of movies, thousands of shows. You settle on something. Halfway through, you're not enjoying it. But instead of focusing on the screen, you're thinking about what you could have picked instead. Maybe that other show would have been better. Maybe you wasted your one free hour tonight on the wrong choice. By the time it ends, you're not satisfied. You're second-guessing. The more options you have, the less satisfied you become. This is the paradox of choice. Freedom feels good in theory. More options should mean better outcomes. But in practice, abundance creates anxiety. Every choice comes with visible alternatives, and those alternatives become a source of regret. You picked this. You could have picked that. The gap between what you chose and what you didn't haunts the experience. The problem is opportunity cost becomes too visible. When there are 3 options, you pick one and move on. When there are 300, every option you didn't pick feels like a loss. You're not just choosing what to watch. You're rejecting hundreds of other things, and your brain keeps track. It wonders if the rejected option would have been better. The choice stops being about what you gained. It becomes about what you gave up. It's everywhere. Careers used to follow predictable paths. Limited choices, limited anxiety. Now, every job feels like it's competing with infinite alternatives. Remote work, freelancing, entrepreneurship, pivoting industries. The possibilities multiply. And instead of feeling free, people feel paralyzed. Every career choice is haunted by the path not taken. Relationships follow the same pattern. Dating apps present endless options. Every match is a choice. Every choice is a rejection of other possibilities. Even after committing, the awareness of alternatives lingers. The paradox isn't that people make worse choices. It's that they enjoy them less. Satisfaction drops because comparison never stops. Even shopping becomes exhausting. 20 types of toothpaste. 40 varieties of yogurt. You pick one. You leave the store wondering if the other brand would have been better. The choice was made, but the decision isn't settled. The abundance turned a simple purchase into an optimization problem. And optimization problems don't have satisfying endings. They have local maxima you're never sure are global. The paradox cuts deeper when stakes are high. Choosing a college. Choosing where to live. Choosing a partner. More options should mean better decisions. But they also mean more doubt, more wondering, more imagining the life you would have had if you'd chosen differently. The freedom to choose becomes the burden of choice. And the burden grows with every additional option. The paradox of choice doesn't mean options are bad. It means that past a certain point, more choice stops making you happier and starts making you more anxious. The sweet spot isn't infinite options. It's enough to feel autonomous, but few enough that the decision doesn't become paralyzing. Most people overshoot, and they wonder why satisfaction feels so elusive. Cobra Effect. Colonial India had a cobra problem. The British government wanted fewer cobras, so they offered a bounty. Cash for every dead cobra. Seemed logical. People started hunting cobras. The snake population dropped. Then something unexpected happened. People started breeding cobras, raising them just to kill them and collect the bounty. When the government discovered the scheme and cancelled the program, the breeders released their now worthless snakes. The cobra population exploded. The solution made the problem worse. An attempt to solve a problem creates a bigger problem. That's the Cobra Effect, and it's a warning about incentives. When you reward an outcome, people optimize for the reward, not the goal. And if the reward can be gamed, it will be. The unintended behavior doesn't emerge from malice. It emerges from rational self-interest responding to poorly designed incentives. The pattern repeats constantly. A city wants to reduce rats, offers payment per rat tail. People start farming rats. A government wants to reduce pollution. Measures emissions at testing stations. Companies install devices that cheat the test. A hospital wants to reduce wait times. Tracks time from arrival to treatment. Staff start the clock when the patient is already halfway through intake. The metric improves. The problem stays the same or gets worse. Software development suffers from this. Management wants more productivity. Measures lines of code written. Developers start writing verbose, inefficient code. The metric goes up. The software quality collapses. Or they measure bugs fixed. So developers start creating bugs to fix later. The numbers look good. The product suffers. Education does it with test scores. Schools want higher performance. Funding to scores. So schools teach to the test. Narrow the curriculum. Push out struggling students. Coach kids on test-taking strategies instead of actual learning. Scores rise. Education degrades. The metric became the mission. The mission got lost. Even well-meaning policies stumble into this. A charity wants to help the homeless. Offers services based on proof of homelessness. Suddenly, people have an incentive to stay homeless longer to keep receiving benefits. The support that was supposed to help people exit homelessness becomes a reason to remain. The incentive structure fights the goal. The effect isn't limited to government. Businesses do it constantly. Sales teams get bonuses for hitting quarterly targets. So they push deals forward, delay bad news, sacrifice long-term relationships for short-term numbers. The quarter looks great. The next year collapses. The incentive optimized for the wrong thing. The Cobra Effect is a reminder that incentives shape behavior in ways that aren't always obvious. People respond to the system as designed, not as intended. And if the system rewards the wrong behavior, you'll get more of that behavior. The solution isn't to remove all incentives. It's to design them carefully, anticipate how they'll be gamed, and measure the right things. Because what you measure is what you'll get. And if you measure the wrong thing, you'll get more of exactly what you don't want. Braess's Paradox. Traffic is terrible. The city builds a new road to ease congestion. More routes should mean faster travel. Commuters celebrate. Then something strange happens. Traffic gets worse. Not just on the new road. Everywhere. Average travel times increase. The city added capacity. The problem got bigger. Adding a resource can make the system worse. This is Braess's paradox, and it's counterintuitive. The logic seems obvious: more roads, less congestion. But transportation networks don't work like that. Every driver optimizes for their own fastest route. When you add a new road, it changes everyone's calculation. People switch routes. The new option looks faster, so everyone takes it. But now the new road is crowded, and so are the roads feeding into it. The system rebalances, and the new equilibrium is slower for everyone. The math is brutal. Individual optimization doesn't lead to collective efficiency. Each driver picks the route that's fastest for them, assuming everyone else stays put. But everyone else is making the same calculation. The result is a Nash equilibrium that's worse for the group than the original setup. Adding the road gave everyone a new option. Using that option made everyone worse off. It's not limited to traffic. Computer networks experience the same thing. Add a new connection to speed up data flow. The network slows down. The new route creates bottlenecks elsewhere. What looked like an improvement in isolation degrades the system as a whole. Even organizational structures follow this pattern. A company adds a new communication channel to improve collaboration. Now there are more meetings, more emails, more coordination overhead. The new channel was supposed to reduce friction. It created more. Everyone optimized locally. The system suffered globally. The paradox shows up in supply chains. Add a new supplier to increase flexibility. Now there's more complexity, more coordination costs, more points of failure. The redundancy that was supposed to make things more reliable makes things more fragile. The extra option didn't distribute load. It amplified chaos. Cities keep learning this the hard way. Widen highways to reduce congestion. Congestion increases because more people drive. Build parking to reduce circling. More parking encourages more driving. The solution feeds the problem. The capacity you add gets filled immediately, and the system degrades further. Braess's paradox doesn't mean you should never add capacity. It means you can't assume that more is better. Systems are interconnected. Individual rational choices can produce collective irrationality. And sometimes the counterintuitive move, removing an option, closing a road, reducing choices, improves outcomes for everyone. The hard part is recognizing when addition makes things worse and when subtraction is the actual solution. Jevons Paradox. Cars become more fuel efficient. Great news. People can drive the same distance using less gas. Costs drop. The planet benefits. Except that's not what happens. People drive more. They take longer trips. They choose to live further from work. Total fuel consumption doesn't drop. It rises. The efficiency improvement didn't reduce usage. It enabled more of it. Making something more efficient increases total consumption. This is Jevons Paradox, named after the economist who noticed that better coal technology didn't reduce coal use in 19th century England. It increased it. When coal engines became more efficient, coal got cheaper. Cheaper coal meant more industries could afford it. More industries using coal meant more total consumption. Efficiency didn't conserve the resource. It expanded the market. The pattern holds across time and technology. LED bulbs use a fraction of the energy of incandescent bulbs. But now people leave lights on longer, install more lights, light spaces that used to stay dark. Total electricity use doesn't drop proportionally. The savings per bulb get offset by more bulbs. Data works the same way. Compression algorithms make files smaller. Streaming becomes cheaper. Video quality improves. But people don't use less data. They stream more. High resolution. Longer sessions. More devices. The efficiency created the conditions for increased consumption. Bandwidth use explodes even as the cost per bit plummets. Even time follows this. Productivity tools are supposed to save time. Email replaces memos. Project management software replaces meetings. But people don't work less. They work more. The time saved gets filled with more tasks, more projects, more communication. Efficiency doesn't create leisure. It creates capacity for more work. Washing machines are a classic example. They reduced the time needed to clean clothes. But instead of doing laundry less often, people started doing it more. Standards changed. Clothes that used to be worn multiple times before washing now go in after one use. The efficiency didn't free up time. It raised expectations. And meeting those expectations consumed the saved time. The paradox challenges the assumption that efficiency solves scarcity. It doesn't. It lowers cost. And lower cost increases demand. The resource gets used more, not less. The efficiency gains get absorbed by expanded consumption. You can see it in cloud storage. Storage gets cheaper. People don't delete old files. They just store more. The capacity increases. The usage increases faster. Jevons Paradox doesn't mean efficiency is bad. It means efficiency alone doesn't reduce consumption. If the goal is conservation, efficiency needs to be paired with constraints. Otherwise, the savings vanish into expanded use. The rebound effect is real. And in many cases, it's total. The efficiency you gain gets completely offset by the behavior it enables. You end up using more of the thing you were trying to conserve. Simpson's Paradox. A hospital reports treatment success rates. Treatment A has a higher success rate than treatment B. Across every subgroup, young patients A wins. Old patients A wins. Mild cases A wins. Severe cases A wins. The data is clear. Treatment A is better. Then you look at the overall numbers. Treatment B has a higher success rate. The pattern you saw in every subset reversed when you combined them. The data didn't lie. But the conclusion flipped. A trend appears in subgroups but reverses when the groups are combined. This is Simpson's paradox, and it's a nightmare for anyone working with data. The pattern that holds in every part doesn't hold for the whole. The reversal isn't an error. It's a feature of how aggregation interacts with hidden variables. And it shows up more often than anyone wants to admit. The mechanism is confounding variables. The groups aren't balanced. Treatment A gets used on healthier patients. Treatment B gets used on sicker ones. Within each severity level, A performs better. But B treats more severe cases overall and still manages a competitive rate. When you combine the data, B's overall success rate looks higher because it's handling harder cases. The subset comparison controlled for severity. The overall comparison didn't. It happens in sports. A basketball player has a better shooting percentage than another player every single season. Year 1 are higher. Year 2 higher. Year 3 higher. But over the combined 3-year span, the second player has a higher percentage. The paradox emerges from shot selection and volume changing year to year. The pattern in each season doesn't predict the aggregate. Admissions data shows it. A university is accused of gender bias. The acceptance rate for men is higher than for women. But when you break it down by department, women have higher acceptance rates in most departments. The reversal comes from application patterns. Women apply to more competitive departments. Men apply to less competitive ones. Within departments, women are accepted at higher rates. Across the university, men are accepted at higher rates. Both statements are true. The paradox is real. Even batting averages aren't immune. One player has a higher batting average than another in each half of the season. But the other player has a higher average for the full season. The paradox emerges because the number of at-bats in each half differs. The weighting changes the result. The danger is overconfidence in data. You see a clear pattern. It holds across every subset. You assume it generalizes. But aggregation can reverse it. The conclusion that feels obvious from subset analysis can be exactly wrong when you zoom out. And unless you're looking for the reversal, you won't see it coming. Simpson's paradox is a reminder that data doesn't interpret itself. The way you slice it matters. The variables you control for matter. The weighting matters. A pattern that seems universal can vanish or invert depending on how you aggregate. And the only defense is skepticism. Check the subsets. Check the whole. Don't assume one predicts the other, because sometimes the truth in the parts and the truth in the total point in opposite directions. Streisand Effect. A company discovers an unflattering article online. Small publication. Minimal traffic. Most people would never see it. Instead of ignoring it, they send a legal threat demanding removal. The publication shares the threat. Other outlets pick it up. Social media amplifies it. Now millions of people are reading the article that would have stayed buried. The attempt to suppress it made it go viral. Trying to hide something makes it more visible. That's the Streisand Effect, named after Barbara Streisand's attempt to suppress photos of her Malibu home. The lawsuit drew massive attention to images almost nobody had seen. The effort to hide them ensured everyone would. Censorship became publicity. Suppression became distribution. The mechanism is simple. Forbidden information becomes interesting information. When someone tries to hide something, people wonder why. What's so important that it needs to be silenced? Curiosity gets triggered. And in the internet age, curiosity spreads fast. The act of suppression signals value. It transforms boring into scandalous just by trying to make it disappear. It happens constantly. A politician tries to scrub an old embarrassing video. The scrubbing effort gets more attention than the video ever did. A corporation issues takedown notices for critical reviews. The reviews get reposted everywhere, now with added context about the censorship attempt. A public figure sues someone for defamation. The lawsuit makes the accusation front-page news. The suppression attempt amplifies the thing being suppressed. Social media accelerates this. A post gets deleted. Screenshots spread. A thread gets removed. People start asking what was said. The mystery becomes more compelling than the original content. Deletion isn't erasure anymore. It's a signal. And signals get amplified. Even legal threats backfire this way. Cease and desist letters used to work, because most people didn't have the resources to fight back. Now they get posted online. The legal threat becomes evidence of something worth hiding. The intimidation tactic becomes a credibility boost for whoever was targeted. Governments do this too. Banning a book makes it a bestseller. Blocking a website makes it a cause. Censoring a documentary turns it into a cultural phenomenon. The ban becomes the marketing, and the thing being banned becomes a symbol of resistance, even when the original content was mundane. The Streisand Effect doesn't mean everything should be ignored. Some things deserve legal action, but the calculation has changed. In a connected world, suppression often costs more than exposure. The attempt to control information frequently loses control entirely, and the result is exactly the opposite of what was intended. The secret gets louder. The embarrassment gets amplified, and the attempt to hide becomes the story. Pygmalion Effect. The teacher is told certain students are high performers, gifted, destined for success. The information is false. The students were selected randomly. But the teacher doesn't know that, so she treats them differently. More attention, higher expectations, more encouragement. By the end of the year, those students are outperforming their peers. Not because they started with more ability, because someone believed they would succeed. High expectations improve performance. This is the Pygmalion Effect, and it's unsettling because it means belief shapes reality. The students weren't special. The belief that they were special made them perform better. The expectation became self-fulfilling, not through magic, through behavior. The teacher's belief changed how she interacted with them, and those interactions changed outcomes. The mechanism runs through subtle signals. Teachers who expect more give more wait time after questions. They offer more detailed feedback. They set harder challenges. They interpret mistakes as learning opportunities instead of confirming low ability. The students sense the expectation. They internalize it. They start to believe it themselves. Confidence builds. Effort increases. Performance follows. It works in management. Leaders who expect high performance from their teams get it. Not because the teams were better to start, because the expectation shifted behavior. More autonomy, more responsibility, more trust. Employees rise to meet expectations when the expectations are clear and genuine. They also sink to meet low ones. Even relationships follow this pattern. If you treat someone like they're trustworthy, they're more likely to act that way. If you treat them like they're unreliable, they'll prove you right. The expectation sets a frame. People tend to operate within that frame. Not always, but often enough that the pattern holds. The effect isn't limitless. Expectations can't override ability entirely. Believing someone can run a marathon won't make it happen if they've never trained. But within realistic ranges, expectation moves the needle. A struggling student who gets treated like a capable one often starts performing like one. Not immediately. Not magically. But gradually through accumulated small shifts in behavior and self-perception. The danger is the reverse. Low expectations also become self-fulfilling. Treat someone like they'll fail and they're more likely to. Give less support. Offer less challenge. Accept mediocrity. The performance matches the expectation. The belief creates the outcome. And then the outcome confirms the belief. The cycle reinforces itself. The Pygmalion Effect is a reminder that expectations aren't neutral observations. They're interventions. The way you see someone changes how you treat them. The way you treat them changes how they see themselves. And how they see themselves shapes what they become. Belief doesn't just predict performance. It creates it. Golem Effect. He's new to the team. The manager mentions he struggled in his last role. The comment spreads. Colleagues start treating him like he's not capable. They don't ask for his input in meetings. They assign him low-priority tasks. They check his work more closely than others. He senses it. His confidence drops. He second-guesses himself. Performance suffers. 6 months later, the manager's assessment feels confirmed. He wasn't a strong performer. The prediction came true. Low expectations reduce performance. That's the Golem Effect, the dark twin of Pygmalion. If high expectations lift performance, low expectations drag it down. The mechanism is the same, just inverted. Belief shapes treatment. Treatment shapes behavior. Behavior confirms belief. Except now the cycle spirals downward instead of up. It starts with assumptions. Someone is labeled weak, slow, unreliable. Maybe the label came from past performance. Maybe from bias. Maybe from a single mistake that stuck. Either way, the label changes how they're treated. Less responsibility. Less feedback. Less opportunity. The message is clear: we don't expect much from you. And people tend to meet expectations. Not because they want to underperform, because the environment stops supporting high performance. When nobody asks for your ideas, you stop offering them. When your work gets scrutinized more than others, you become cautious and slow. When you're given only simple tasks, you don't develop complex skills. The low expectation becomes a ceiling, and over time, performance drops to meet it. It's everywhere. Students labeled as struggling get less challenging material. They fall further behind, not because they couldn't handle harder work, because they were never given the chance. The label became a limit. Employees pigeonholed into junior roles stopped growing, not because they lacked potential, because the organization stopped investing in them. The expectation capped the trajectory. Managers do this without realizing it. They think they're being realistic. This person isn't ready for that responsibility, so they don't give it. And because they don't give it, the person never becomes ready. The withholding of opportunity masquerades as prudent judgment. But it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The lack of growth confirms the initial assessment. And the cycle continues. The effect compounds in groups. Once someone is labeled low-performing, the label spreads. Other people start treating them that way too. The perception becomes consensus, and fighting against consensus is exhausting. Most people stop trying. They accept the role they've been given, not because it's accurate, because resisting it costs more energy than they have. The Golem Effect is why first impressions matter so much, and why recovering from a bad start is so hard. The initial expectation sets the tone. If it's low, everything that follows gets filtered through that lens. Mistakes get magnified. Successes get dismissed as flukes. The narrative locks in. And once it locks in, changing it requires overcoming not just your own doubt, but everyone else's too. Observer Effect. A factory wants to improve productivity. They start tracking output per worker. Suddenly, productivity jumps. Not because of new equipment or processes, just from being measured. Workers know they're being watched. Behavior changes. Then over time it settles back. The initial spike fades. The act of observation changed the result, but only temporarily. Measuring something changes it. That's the observer effect, and it's more than a physics curiosity. In quantum mechanics, observing a particle alters its state. In human behavior, observing performance alters the performance. The measurement isn't neutral. It's an intervention. And the intervention distorts what you're trying to measure. The effect shows up in research constantly. Studies that rely on self-reporting get skewed data. People don't just report behavior. They change behavior because they're reporting it. Someone tracking their own exercise works out more. Someone logging their spending spends less. The act of tracking shifts the thing being tracked. You're no longer measuring natural behavior. You're measuring tracked behavior. And those aren't the same. Performance reviews do this. Announce that you're evaluating something, and that thing improves temporarily. not because the underlying capability changed, because awareness increased. People focus on what's being measured. They optimize for it. Then, once the spotlight moves, behavior drifts back. The measurement created a temporary artifact. It didn't reveal a stable truth. Even casual observation changes things. Walk into a classroom as an observer. Students behave differently. Teachers teach differently. You're not seeing normal operation. You're seeing performance under observation. The same happens in workplaces. Executives visit the floor. Suddenly everyone is busy, engaged, following protocol. It's not deception. It's response to observation. And it makes the observation less reliable. The digital age amplified this. Metrics are everywhere. Website analytics track every click. Apps monitor every action. Employees know their activity is logged. The knowledge changes behavior. People game the metrics. They optimize for what's visible. The measurement stops capturing reality and starts shaping it. You think you're observing the system. You're actually altering it. The problem is you can't just stop measuring. Measurement is necessary. But pretending the measurement is invisible, that it doesn't interfere, leads to bad conclusions. The data isn't a clean window into truth. It's a reflection of how people respond to being measured. And that response is part of what you're capturing. The observer effect doesn't mean all data is useless. It means you have to account for the distortion. Recognize that observation changes the observed. The baseline you're measuring against isn't static. It shifted the moment you started measuring. And if you don't adjust for that, you'll mistake the artifact for the reality. You'll think you've improved something when all you've done is make people aware they're being watched. Law of Unintended Consequences. A city bans plastic bags to reduce waste. Sounds good. Pollution drops, right? Except people switch to reusable bags that require far more energy to produce. Most people don't reuse them enough to offset the environmental cost. Waste shifts from plastic bags to the production and disposal of heavier alternatives. The total environmental impact gets worse. The policy worked as written. The outcome failed the goal. Actions produce results you didn't plan for. This is the law of unintended consequences, and it's a constant reminder that systems are more complex than intentions. You solve for one variable. Others shift in response. The second-order effects, the things that happen because of what you did, often matter more than the first-order effects you intended. The pattern is everywhere. Rent control aims to make housing affordable. Landlords reduce maintenance, stop building new units, convert rentals to condos. Supply drops. Prices for uncontrolled units rise. The people the policy was meant to help get squeezed harder. Antibiotics save lives. Overuse creates resistant bacteria. Now common infections become deadly. The solution creates a new worse problem. Even well-meaning social programs stumble into this. Welfare designed to help the poor sometimes creates incentives that trap people in poverty. Earn too much, lose benefits. The marginal cost of working more becomes prohibitive. The safety net becomes a ceiling. The program helps in the short term. It harms in the long term. The unintended consequence outweighs the intended benefit. Technology is full of this. Social media was supposed to connect people. It also polarized them, amplified misinformation, and created addiction loops. Cars gave people freedom of movement. They also created sprawl, pollution, and traffic deaths. Every innovation solves a problem. Every innovation creates new ones. The question is whether the trade-off is worth it. And often, the new problems don't become visible until it's too late to reverse course. The challenge is prediction. Complex systems have too many variables. You can't foresee every interaction. So you make your best guess. You implement the policy, and then reality unfolds in ways you didn't anticipate. The unintended consequences weren't hidden. They were just downstream. And downstream effects are harder to see than direct effects. The law doesn't mean you shouldn't act. It means you should expect surprises. Plan for the second-order effects. Ask not just what happens if this works, but what happens because this works. What behaviors will change? What will people optimize for? What new problems will emerge? Because they will emerge. The question is whether you're ready for them. The law of unintended consequences is humility encoded. You don't control outcomes. You influence them, and influence propagates in ways you can't fully predict. The system reacts. People adapt, and the result is rarely what you planned. Sometimes better, often worse. Almost never exactly what you expected. Scarcity Principle. A brand releases a limited edition product. Only 1,000 units. The quality is identical to the regular version. But the scarcity changes everything. People who never wanted the regular version suddenly need this one. Not because it's better, because it's rare. The limitation creates urgency. The urgency creates desire. The product sells out in hours. Scarcity didn't add value. It made people feel like they were losing an opportunity. Limited availability increases perceived value. That's the scarcity principle, and it's one of the most powerful drivers of human behavior. Rarity makes things feel more valuable, not objectively. Psychologically, when something is hard to get, we want it more. Not because we've evaluated it carefully. Because scarcity triggers loss aversion. The fear of missing out overrides rational assessment. The mechanism is emotional. Abundance feels safe. You can always get it later. Scarcity feels threatening. If you don't act now, it's gone. That shift from "I can have this anytime" to "this is my only chance" changes the entire calculation. Suddenly, the decision isn't about whether you want it. It's about whether you can afford to lose it. Marketing weaponizes this. Only 3 left in stock, limited time offer, exclusive access. The phrases aren't informational. They're psychological triggers. They create artificial urgency. The product hasn't changed. The availability narrative has. And that narrative drives behavior. People buy things they don't need because scarcity makes them feel like they can't afford to wait. It works in relationships too. Someone becomes more attractive when they're hard to get. Not because they've changed. Because scarcity implies value. If everyone wants them, they must be worth wanting. The logic is backward, but it's how people think. Availability signals low value. Scarcity signals high value. And people chase what feels scarce. Even information follows this pattern. Exclusive knowledge feels more valuable than public knowledge. A secret shared with a few feels important. The same information, widely known, feels trivial. The scarcity of access changes the perceived worth, not the content, the distribution. The danger is manipulation. Scarcity can be real, but it can also be fabricated, limited, addition. Sometimes just means we're making it sound limited. Only a few spots left. Sometimes means we're pretending there's a cap. The tactic works because most people don't verify. They react, and the reaction is what the scarcity narrative is designed to produce. The scarcity principle isn't about actual rarity. It's about perceived rarity. And perception is easy to manipulate. Make people believe something is running out and they'll value it higher. Make them believe they might lose access and they'll act faster. The scarcity doesn't have to be real. It just has to feel real. And once it feels real, behavior follows. Reciprocity Principle. A colleague brings you coffee. Unprompted. Just a small gesture. Later that week, they ask for a favor. Can you cover their shift? Normally, you'd say no. But you remember the coffee. You feel like you owe them. So you say yes. The favor you return is worth far more than the coffee ever was. But the debt feels real, and refusing feels wrong. When someone gives you something, you feel obligated to give back. That's the reciprocity principle, and it's one of the most powerful social mechanisms humans have. The obligation to return favors is deep. It's not just politeness. It's hardwired. When someone does something for you, even something small, you feel indebted. And that feeling of debt influences behavior far beyond the value of what was given. The principle works because it's asymmetric. The thing given and the thing returned don't have to match. A free sample at the grocery store costs pennies, but it increases the chance you'll buy the full product. A restaurant gives you a mint with the check. Tips go up. The mint cost almost nothing. The return is disproportionate. The gesture creates obligation. The obligation drives reciprocation. It shows up everywhere. Charities send you address labels you didn't ask for. Now you feel guilty not donating. Salespeople offer you something for free up front. A consultation, a trial, a gift. Now you feel like you owe them your business. The sequence is calculated. Give first. Create debt. Collect later. Even relationships operate this way. Someone invites you to dinner. You feel obligated to invite them back. A friend helps you move. You feel like you owe them. The ledger is invisible, but everyone keeps one. And the obligation to balance it drives behavior long after the initial favor. The effect is stronger when the gift feels personal. A generic promotion doesn't create much obligation. But a handwritten note, a customized recommendation, something that feels tailored that hits harder. The perception of effort increases the debt, and the debt increases the likelihood of reciprocation. Negotiations weaponize this. Make a concession early. The other side feels obligated to reciprocate. The concession doesn't have to be real. It just has to feel like you gave something up. Now they owe you. And that sense of owing shifts the negotiation in your favor. The Reciprocity Principle doesn't mean every favor is manipulation. Most people genuinely want to help. But the mechanism is real, and it's exploitable. When someone gives you something for free, especially in a commercial context, ask yourself why. Because the gift isn't free. It's an investment, and the return they're expecting is bigger than what they gave. Anchoring Effect. The car is listed at 30,000. You think that's too high. You negotiate. You get them down to 26. You feel like you won. You got a discount, but the car was only worth 22. The dealer knew that. They set the anchor high. Your negotiation happened within the frame they created. The 30,000 wasn't the real price. It was the reference point. And it shaped everything that followed. The first number you see becomes the baseline for all other judgments. That's the anchoring effect, and it's brutal because it works even when you know it's happening. The initial number, no matter how arbitrary, sets the frame. Everything else gets judged relative to that anchor. Too high, too low, reasonable, all determined by the first number you encountered. And once the anchor is set, it's hard to escape. The mechanism is cognitive. Your brain needs a starting point for evaluation. When you don't have one, you grab the first number available. That number becomes the reference. And even if you adjust away from it, you don't adjust far enough. The anchor pulls your estimate toward it. You think you're being rational. You're not. You're being influenced. It shows up in pricing constantly. Retailers list the original price next to the sale price. The original price is the anchor. It makes the sale price look like a deal. Whether the original price was ever real doesn't matter. It set the frame. Now the sale price feels like a win. Even courtrooms aren't immune. A prosecutor asks for a 10-year sentence. The defense argues for 2. The judge lands at 6. The 10 wasn't realistic, but it anchored the negotiation. The final sentence is higher than it would have been if the prosecutor had asked for 5. The anchor shifted the acceptable range. Job offers work the same way. The first salary number mentioned becomes the anchor. If the company throws out a low number first, your counteroffer will be pulled toward it. If you throw out a high number, their counteroffer shifts up. The negotiation isn't about fair value. It's about adjusting from the anchor. And whoever sets the anchor controls the range. Restaurants use this too. They put an expensive item at the top of the menu. Most people don't order it. But it makes everything else look cheaper by comparison. The anchor isn't there to be bought. It's there to shift perception. And it works. People order more expensive items than they would if the anchor weren't there. The anchoring effect doesn't mean the first number is always wrong. Sometimes it's accurate. But even when it's not, it still influences judgment. The only defense is awareness. Recognize the anchor. Question where it came from. Ask yourself what the number would be if you hadn't seen that initial reference. Because once the anchor is set, your brain will keep using it. Even when you know better. Endowment Effect. You buy a concert ticket for $50. The show sells out. Now tickets are reselling for $200. You wouldn't pay $200 for a ticket, but you also won't sell yours for $200. You'd rather go to the concert than have the cash. Which is strange. Because if you didn't already own the ticket, you wouldn't buy it at that price. Ownership changed the value, not the ticket. Your perception of it. People value things more once they own them. That's the endowment effect, and it's irrational. The ticket is the same whether you own it or not. The market price is the same, but ownership creates attachment, and attachment inflates value. You overvalue what you have simply because it's yours. The possession becomes more valuable than an identical item you don't possess. The mechanism is loss aversion. Losing something feels worse than gaining the same thing feels good. So when you own something, the thought of selling it triggers loss. Even if you gain money, the loss of the item weighs heavier. The psychological cost of giving it up exceeds the actual value. And you hold on. It shows up in real estate constantly. Homeowners overvalue their houses. They list them above market price because they see all the improvements, the memories, the effort they put in. Buyers see a house. Owners see their house. And their house is worth more. Not objectively. Emotionally. The endowment inflates the price. And deals fall apart because sellers won't accept what the market will pay. It happens with stocks too. Investors hold losing positions longer than they should. If they didn't already own the stock, they wouldn't buy it at the current price. But because they own it, selling feels like admitting a loss. So, they hold. The endowment keeps them locked in. Even when selling is the rational move. Even trivial possessions trigger this. Give someone a mug. Ask them how much they'd sell it for. Then ask someone else how much they'd pay for the same mug. The seller's price is always higher. Ownership created a gap. The mug didn't change. The owner's valuation did. The moment they possessed it, it became worth more. The effect makes trade harder. If everyone overvalues what they own, fewer transactions happen. You won't sell unless the price exceeds your inflated valuation. Buyers won't pay your inflated price because they don't have the attachment. The gap between what sellers want and what buyers will pay widens. And value sits unused because ownership made it too expensive to trade. The endowment effect doesn't mean you shouldn't value your possessions. It means ownership distorts value. The attachment you feel isn't based on the object's worth. It's based on the fact that it's yours. And that attachment makes you overpay to keep things and undervalue opportunities to let them go. The rational move is often to sell. But the endowment makes it feel like a loss, and losses hurt more than gains feel good. Sunk cost fallacy. The project is failing. Everyone knows it. 6 months in, the results are nowhere near the target. The timeline has slipped twice. The budget is gone. But the team keeps going. Why? Because they've already invested so much. Stopping now would mean all that effort was wasted. So they double down. More time, more money, more resources. The project isn't going to succeed. But quitting feels like admitting failure. So they pour more in. And the failure gets bigger. You continue something because you've already invested in it, not because it's worth continuing. That's the sunk cost fallacy, and it's a trap. The resources you've already spent are gone. They're not coming back. The only question that matters is whether continuing makes sense from here. But people don't think that way. They think about what they've already put in, and the more they've invested, the harder it is to walk away. The past cost pulls them forward, even when the future cost is guaranteed to be wasted too. The mechanism is loss aversion combined with justification. Quitting means admitting the investment was a mistake, and admitting mistakes is hard. So people keep going, not because the path forward is good, because the path backward feels like failure. The sunk cost creates an illusion. The illusion is that continuing will somehow recover what was lost. It won't, but the hope keeps people locked in. It shows up in careers. Someone spends years in a field they hate. They stay because they've already invested so much time. Leaving would mean those years were wasted, so they stay, and waste more years. The sunk cost of the past traps them in a bad future. Relationships follow the same pattern. Years invested in a failing partnership. The relationship isn't working, but ending it feels like throwing away all that time. So people stay. The sunk cost of history outweighs the cost of continuing. And both people stay miserable because walking away feels like admitting the investment failed. Businesses do this with bad products. Millions spent on development. The product isn't working. The market doesn't want it. But the company keeps pouring money in. Why? Because stopping means the initial investment was a loss. So they chase the sunk cost. They throw more money at a lost cause. And the loss compounds. Even small decisions get trapped this way. You're watching a terrible movie. You've already spent an hour. You could leave, but you stay because you've already invested the time. You're not staying because the movie got better. You're staying because quitting feels like wasting what you've already spent. The sunk cost holds you in your seat. The fix is simple but emotionally hard. Ignore what you've already spent. It's gone. The only question is whether continuing makes sense from this point forward. If it does, continue. If it doesn't, stop. The past investment is irrelevant. But it doesn't feel irrelevant. It feels like a debt you haven't repaid. And that feeling keeps people locked into bad decisions long after the rational choice became obvious. IKEA Effect. You spend 3 hours assembling a bookshelf. The instructions were confusing. The pieces didn't fit right. You stripped 2 screws. But you got it done. Now it's standing in your room. It's not a particularly nice bookshelf. Objectively, it's cheap furniture. But you love it. You're proud of it. If someone offered to buy it, you'd ask for way more than it's worth. Not because it's valuable, because you built it. You overvalue things you've put effort into creating. That's the IKEA Effect, named after the furniture company that makes you do the work. The effort you invest in building something increases how much you value it. Not because the effort improved the product, because the effort created attachment. You made this, and things you make feel more valuable than things you buy. The mechanism is justification. You spent time and energy on it. That investment needs to feel worthwhile. So your brain inflates the value. The bookshelf becomes more than furniture. It becomes proof that your effort mattered, and admitting it's just cheap particle board feels like admitting your time was wasted. So you don't admit it. You value it higher instead. It shows up in cooking. A meal you spent hours preparing tastes better than the same meal from a restaurant. Not because your cooking is superior, because you made it. The effort created a bias. The dish isn't objectively better. Your valuation of it is. Even work projects follow this. You build a presentation from scratch. Spend days on it. Someone suggests using a template instead. You resist. Not because your version is better, because you built it. The effort makes it feel more valuable. Even when the template would work just as well, the effect makes people overvalue their own ideas. You brainstorm a solution. Someone else suggests a different one. Objectively, theirs might be better. But yours feels better because it's yours. You generated it. That effort creates attachment. And the attachment skews judgment. Companies use this. Customization options make products feel more valuable. You picked the color. You chose the features. You configured it. Now it's not just a product. It's your product. The effort of choosing increased the perceived value. Even though the actual value didn't change. DIY culture thrives on this. People build furniture, renovate homes, create art. The results are often objectively worse than professional work. But they feel more valuable. The effort justifies the outcome. And the outcome gets overvalued because of the effort. The quality is secondary. The attachment is primary. The IKEA effect isn't always bad. Pride in your work is real. Effort does create meaning. But it also creates bias. The time you spent doesn't make the result better. It makes you think the result is better. And that distortion affects decisions. You keep bad ideas because you generated them. You use inferior products because you built them. The effort clouds judgment. And judgment gets replaced by attachment. Ben Franklin Effect. You dislike someone. They ask you for a favor. You do it anyway. Maybe out of politeness. Maybe because saying no felt awkward. But then something strange happens. After you help them, you like them more. Not less. More. You did them a favor. And now you feel warmer toward them. The hostility softened. The relationship improved. Not because they did something for you. Because you did something for them. Doing a favor for someone makes you like them more. This is the Ben Franklin Effect, named after Franklin's observation that getting an enemy to lend him a book turned that enemy into a friend. The logic seems backward. Shouldn't the person receiving the favor like you more? But that's not how it works. The person giving the favor experiences the shift. You help someone. And your brain needs to explain why. The easiest explanation is that you must like them. Otherwise, why would you help? The behavior changes the attitude, not the other way around. The mechanism is cognitive dissonance. You helped someone you claimed to dislike. That's inconsistent. Your brain resolves the inconsistency by adjusting your feelings. I must not dislike them that much if I'm willing to help. The action came first. The justification followed. And the justification rewrote the relationship. It works in reverse too. If you harm someone, you start to dislike them more. Not because they did something to deserve it, because your brain justifies the harm. They must deserve it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. The action creates the narrative. The narrative shifts the emotion. Managers use this instinctively. They ask employees for input, not because they need it. Because asking creates investment. The employee contributes. Now they're part of it. And being part of it makes them more committed. The favor of giving feedback made them more engaged. The act of helping increased their attachment. It shows up in persuasion. Want someone to like you. Don't do them a favor. Ask them for one. A small one. Something easy. They help. Now they've invested in you. An investment shifts perception. The person who helps feels closer to the person they help. The relationship moved because the helper's behavior changed first, and their feelings followed. Even simple requests work this way. Can I borrow a pen? The person lends it. Now they've done you a small favor. And that small favor makes them slightly more inclined to like you. The act of helping created a micro bond. The bond wasn't there before. The action built it. The Ben Franklin effect reveals something uncomfortable. Your feelings aren't fixed. They follow your actions. You don't help people because you like them. You like them because you help them. The behavior shapes the emotion. And once you've acted, your mind rewrites the story to make the action make sense. The favor justifies itself. And the justification changes how you feel. Zeigarnik Effect. You finish most of your tasks. Email answered. Report filed. Meeting scheduled. But one thing is still hanging. An unfinished proposal. You keep thinking about it. Even when you're doing something else, it's there. Nagging. Incomplete. The finished tasks fade from your mind. The unfinished one won't let go. It stays active, demanding attention, until you close it. Unfinished tasks stick in your memory more than completed ones. That's the Zeigarnik Effect, named after a psychologist who noticed waiters could remember complex orders perfectly until the bill was paid. Then the memory vanished. The incomplete transaction held their attention. Completion released it. The brain treats unfinished business as active. And active items occupy mental space. They intrude. They demand resolution. Finished items get filed away. Unfinished ones loop. The mechanism is cognitive tension. An open task creates a mental load. Your brain keeps it accessible because it's not done. The moment you finish it, the tension releases. The task drops from active memory. Not because you forgot it, because it's no longer unresolved. The incompletion is what kept it front and center. It shows up in entertainment constantly. Cliffhangers work because of this. A show ends mid-scene. You need to know what happens next. The story is incomplete. Your brain won't let it go. The incompletion creates a hook, and the hook keeps you thinking about it until the next episode resolves it. Books use it too. Each chapter ends with something unresolved. Not always dramatic, just open. A question unanswered, a tension unrelieved. You keep reading because closing the book feels like leaving something undone. The Zeigarnik Effect keeps you turning pages. The resolution is the only way to release the mental pressure. Even games exploit this. Progress bars, unfinished levels, quests left incomplete. Your brain registers them as open loops, and open loops nag. The game stays in your thoughts because you haven't finished it. The incompletion pulls you back. Not because the game is inherently compelling, because unfinished feels worse than not started. Productivity systems try to weaponize this in reverse. Break big tasks into small ones. Complete the small ones quickly. Each completion releases the tension. Each open loop closed frees mental space. But the reverse is also true. Starting something without finishing it creates a burden. The half-done project occupies more mental energy than the project you haven't started. Because incomplete is heavier than not begun. The Zeigarnik Effect explains why unfinished conversations haunt you. Why incomplete projects nag at you. Why cliffhangers work. The brain doesn't like loose ends. It holds onto them, keeps them active, prioritizes them, and the only way to clear them is to finish them. Completion is relief. Incompletion is weight. And the weight doesn't go away until the loop closes. Pratfall Effect. A candidate is giving a presentation. Polished. Professional. Perfect. Perfect. Then they spill coffee on themselves. They laugh it off. Make a joke. Keep going. Afterward, people like them more, not less. The mistake didn't hurt them. It humanized them. The perfection was intimidating. The flaw made them relatable. The coffee spill wasn't a failure. It was a connection point. A small mistake makes competent people more likable. That's the Pratfall Effect, and it only works under specific conditions. The person has to be competent first. Mistakes make competent people seem human. They make incompetent people seem more incompetent. The effect is about relatability, not excuses. If you're already struggling, another mistake just confirms the perception. But if you're perceived as capable, a minor flaw softens the edges. The mechanism is perceived distance. Someone who's too perfect feels unreachable. Flawless performance creates a gap. You can admire it, but you can't connect with it. A small mistake closes that gap. It signals, I'm human too. The competence stays. The intimidation drops. And likability rises. It shows up in public speaking. Speakers who acknowledge a stumble, who laugh at a minor error, who show they're not robots, connect better with audiences. Not because the mistake was good, because the recovery was human. The audience sees themselves in the flaw, and that recognition builds rapport. Celebrities experience this too. The perfect image feels distant. A candid moment, an awkward laugh, a minor embarrassment, these make them relatable. Fans don't want perfection. They want connection. And connection requires some vulnerability. The flaw provides it. Even job interviews follow this pattern. A candidate who's too polished feels rehearsed. A small, authentic mistake handled well can actually help. It shows they're real. They're not performing a script. They're being themselves. And being yourself, flaws included, is often more appealing than trying to be flawless. But the effect has limits. The mistake has to be minor. Spilling coffee works. Bungling the entire presentation doesn't. The person has to recover gracefully. Making the mistake worse kills the effect. And the competence has to be established first. If you're already seen as incompetent, mistakes just pile on. The Pratfall Effect is about humanizing competence, not excusing failure. The takeaway isn't to manufacture mistakes. It's to stop fearing small ones. Perfection isn't always the goal. Connection is, and sometimes a flaw builds a bridge that perfection can't. Mere exposure effect. A song comes on the radio. First time you hear it, you're indifferent. Maybe you even dislike it, but it keeps playing. You hear it again. And again. By the 10th time, you're humming along. You didn't decide to like it. You just got used to it. Familiarity replaced resistance. The song didn't change. Your response to it did. Repeated exposure increases liking. That's the mere exposure effect, and it's why advertising works through repetition. You don't need to love the ad. You just need to see it enough times. The brand becomes familiar. Familiarity feels safe. Safe feels preferable. You're more likely to choose the familiar option over the unfamiliar one. Not because it's better, because you've seen it before. The mechanism is cognitive ease. Familiar things require less mental effort to process. Your brain has seen it before. It knows what it is. That ease feels good, and your brain mistakes that ease for preference. The unfamiliar requires work. Work feels less pleasant. So you gravitate toward what's easy to process. And what's easy to process is what you've encountered before. It shows up in music constantly. Radio stations play the same songs on repeat. Not because they're objectively the best, because repetition creates preference. The more you hear something, the more you like it. Even if you hated it at first, the exposure wears down resistance. And eventually, familiarity wins. Faces work the same way. People you see regularly become more attractive over time. Not because they changed. Because your brain got used to them. The initial impression fades. The familiarity builds. And familiarity is comforting. Attraction follows comfort. Even political campaigns rely on this. The candidate with more name recognition has an advantage. Not because voters researched them. Because voters have heard the name more. The repetition creates a sense of familiarity. And familiarity biases choice. The voter feels like they know the candidate. They don't. They've just been exposed to the name enough times that it feels safe. Marketing weaponizes this relentlessly. Billboards, commercials, social media ads. The product doesn't have to be good. It just has to be seen. Repeatedly. The exposure does the work. By the time you're ready to buy, the familiar brand feels like the obvious choice. Not because you evaluated it. Because you've seen it so many times it feels right. The effect has limits. Overexposure can backfire. Hear the same song too many times, and you start to hate it. See the same ad too often, and it becomes annoying. The sweet spot is enough repetition to build familiarity, but not so much that it crosses into irritation. And most marketing aims for that edge. Familiar enough to prefer. Not so familiar that you're sick of it. The mere exposure effect doesn't mean repetition guarantees liking. It means familiarity biases judgment. The thing you've seen before feels safer than the thing you haven't. And safety, in the absence of strong feelings either way, tips the scale. Repetition builds preference. Slowly, quietly, and often without you noticing. Halo effect. An employee is attractive, well-dressed, articulate. In meetings, they make a good impression. When performance reviews come around, they get rated higher. Not because their work is objectively better, because the positive impression in one area bleeds into others. They're good at presenting, so they must be good at everything. The halo from one strength casts light on everything else, even when it shouldn't. One positive trait makes people assume other positive traits. That's the halo effect, and it's why first impressions matter so much. If someone makes a good initial impression, that impression colors everything that follows. They seem smarter, more trustworthy, more competent. Not because they demonstrated those qualities. Because the brain generalizes. One good thing suggests other good things. The halo spreads. The mechanism is cognitive shortcut. Evaluating every trait independently takes effort. Your brain wants to simplify. So it takes one clear signal and extends it. Attractive people are assumed to be kinder, smarter, more successful. Not because attractiveness correlates with those traits. Because the positive impression creates a halo. And the halo makes everything else look better. It shows up in hiring constantly. A candidate with an impressive resume gets more benefit of the doubt in the interview. They stumble on a question, but the interviewer assumes they were just nervous. A less impressive candidate stumbles, and it confirms doubt. The halo from credentials makes everything else look better. The lack of halo makes everything else look worse. Brands use this. A company known for one great product gets assumed to make other great products. Apple makes good phones. People assume their laptops, watches, and headphones are also good. The halo from the phone extends to the entire brand, whether or not it's deserved. Even teachers fall into this. A student who's polite and engaged gets graded more favorably. Not because their answers are better, because the positive impression bleeds into assessment. The halo makes the teacher see their work more charitably. Small errors get overlooked. Ambiguous answers get the benefit of the doubt. The effect works in reverse too. That's the Horn effect. One negative trait makes people assume other negative traits. Someone is late once. Now they're seen as unreliable in general. The negative halo spreads. One bad impression colors everything. The danger is that halos aren't based on comprehensive evidence. They're based on one or two salient traits. And those traits might not predict anything else. Being attractive doesn't make you competent. Being well-spoken doesn't make you trustworthy. But the brain connects them anyway. The halo bridges the gap. And the gap gets filled with assumptions that might be completely wrong. The halo effect doesn't mean first impressions are meaningless. It means they're too meaningful. One positive trait can lift perception across the board. Even when the traits aren't related, the halo spreads. And once it's there, it's hard to see past. Horn effect. He shows up late to the first meeting. Just once. Traffic. But now there's a mark. He's late again a month later. different reason. Doesn't matter. The impression is set. Unreliable. When he submits work on time, it barely registers. When he's late, it confirms the pattern. The first lateness created a lens. Everything after gets filtered through it. One mistake became a permanent label. One negative trait makes people assume other negative traits. That's the horn effect, the dark mirror of the halo effect. If one positive trait casts a halo, one negative trait casts a shadow, and that shadow spreads. The person isn't just late. They're careless, disorganized, uncommitted. The single flaw suggests a pattern. And once the pattern is assumed, it's hard to break. The mechanism is the same as the halo effect, just inverted. The brain takes one clear negative signal and generalizes. Evaluating every trait independently is hard, so the brain uses shortcuts. One bad thing suggests other bad things. The horn grows, and it colors everything else. It shows up in performance reviews. An employee makes one visible mistake. Now their competence is questioned. Other work gets scrutinized more closely. Errors that would have been overlooked in someone else get magnified. The horn makes everything look worse. The negative impression becomes a filter, and the filter distorts perception. Even physical appearance triggers this. Someone is unkempt. People assume they're lazy, careless, unreliable. The assumption has no logical basis. But the brain connects appearance to character. The negative horn spreads, and suddenly one visible trait is predicting traits that have nothing to do with it. Job interviews suffer from this. A candidate gives a weak answer early. The rest of the interview is tainted. Good answers get discounted. The interviewer is already convinced. The early mistake created a horn. And the horn won't let go, even when later performance contradicts it. Education does this too. A student struggles in one subject. Teachers start assuming they struggle in general. The horn makes them see the student as less capable, even in areas where the student performs fine. The negative impression in one domain spreads to others, and the student gets trapped in a perception that doesn't match reality. The horn effect is especially dangerous because it's sticky. Halo effects can fade, but horn effects reinforce themselves. Negative events get remembered more than positive ones. Mistakes get magnified. Successes get explained away. They got lucky. It was easy. The horn survives evidence against it, because the brain is looking for confirmation, not correction. Breaking a horn is harder than building a halo. You need consistent, undeniable positive performance. And even then, the shadow lingers. People remember the mistake. They forget the recovery. The horn shrinks slowly, if it shrinks at all. The horn effect doesn't mean you should avoid all mistakes. It means the first mistake matters more than it should. One slip can set a tone that follows you. Not because the mistake defines you, because people assume it does. The horn spreads, and once it's there, everything else gets seen through its shadow. Bandwagon Effect. A restaurant has a line out the door. You're walking by, trying to decide where to eat. You weren't considering this place. But the line signals something. If that many people are waiting, it must be good. You join the line. You didn't research the restaurant. You didn't check reviews. You just saw other people choosing it, and their choice influenced yours. The crowd made the decision for you. People adopt beliefs and behaviors because others are doing it. That's the bandwagon effect, and it's one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. We look to others to decide what's right, what's popular, what's safe. The more people doing something, the more it feels like the correct choice. Not because we've evaluated it, because the crowd provides social proof, and social proof overrides independent judgment. The mechanism is uncertainty reduction. When you don't know what to choose, you look for signals. The behavior of others is a signal. If many people are doing it, it's probably safe, probably good, Probably the right call. Your brain shortcuts the decision. Instead of evaluating on your own, you follow the crowd. The crowd becomes the authority. It shows up in consumer behavior constantly. Bestseller, labels drive sales. Not because the book is better, because it's already popular. And popularity suggests quality. People buy it because other people bought it. The bandwagon builds momentum. And the momentum feeds itself. Fashion follows this pattern. Trends emerge. A few people adopt them. Others see the trend forming. They don't want to be left out. They join. The trend accelerates, not because everyone independently decided the style was good, because the bandwagon made it feel like the only choice. The crowd became the standard. Even opinions work this way. A political view gains traction. More people express it. Others start to agree, not because they've deeply considered the issue, because the growing consensus feels like truth. The bandwagon makes dissent feel lonely. And most people don't want to stand alone, so they join. The majority grows, and the majority becomes self-reinforcing. Social media amplifies this to an extreme. Likes and shares are visible. Posts with high engagement get more engagement. The bandwagon is quantified. You can see how many people are on it, and that visibility makes it harder to resist. The algorithm favors the bandwagon. Popularity breeds more popularity. The effect compounds. Investing suffers from this. A stock rises. More people buy. The price rises more. More people buy. The bandwagon inflates the bubble. Eventually, it pops. But while it's rising, the crowd makes it feel safe. Everyone's doing it. How could everyone be wrong? Easily. But the bandwagon makes it hard to see. The bandwagon effect doesn't mean crowds are always wrong. Sometimes the crowd is right. Sometimes popularity does signal quality. But the effect means people aren't choosing based on independent evaluation. They're choosing based on what others chose. The decision isn't informed. It's social. And social decisions can lead entire groups off a cliff. Because once the bandwagon is moving, questioning it feels like the risky choice. So, people stay on, even when the destination is wrong. Decoy Effect. You're buying a subscription. 2 options. Basic for $10, Premium for $20. You're leaning toward Basic. Then a third option appears. Premium Plus for $25. It has features you don't need. You're not considering it. But suddenly, the $20 Premium looks like a better deal. Not because it changed, because the decoy made it look reasonable. You buy Premium. The decoy did its job. Adding an inferior option makes another option look better. That's the Decoy Effect, and it's everywhere in pricing. The decoy isn't there to be chosen. It's there to shift your perception of the other options. It creates a comparison point. And that comparison makes the target option look like the smart middle ground. You're not being tricked. You're being guided. And the guidance works. The mechanism is relative evaluation. You don't assess value in isolation. You compare. When 2 options exist, the comparison is direct. When a third option appears, especially one that's clearly worse than one of the originals, it changes the frame. The previously expensive option now looks reasonable. Not because its value changed, because the context did. It shows up in product pricing constantly. Movie theaters offer small, medium, and large popcorn. The large is barely more expensive than the medium. Most people buy large, not because they need it, because the medium looks like bad value. The medium is the decoy. It's there to make large feel like the obvious choice. Restaurants do this with wine lists. They put an extremely expensive bottle near the top. Most people don't order it, but it makes the second most expensive bottle look affordable. The decoy shifts the reference point. What felt expensive now feels reasonable. And sales of the second-tier wine increase. Even real estate agents use this. They show you a terrible house first. Overpriced. Run down. Not what you want. Then they show you the house they actually want to sell. It looks amazing by comparison. Not because it's objectively great. Because the decoy made it feel great. The bad house wasn't a mistake. It was strategy. The effect works because people are bad at absolute valuation. We need context. And whoever controls the context controls the choice. Add a decoy, and you shift the frame. Shift the frame, and you shift the decision. The decoy doesn't win. It makes the target win. And the target is what someone wanted you to choose all along. Default effect. A company rolls out a new retirement plan. Employees have to opt in. Participation stays low. Most people intend to sign up, but they don't. It's on the list. It stays on the list. Years pass. Then the company switches the policy. Now employees are enrolled by default. They can opt out if they want. Participation jumps to over 90%. The plan didn't change. The default did. And the default made all the difference. People stick with the default option. That's the default effect, and it's one of the most powerful nudges in behavioral design. The default isn't just a starting point. It's an anchor. Most people won't move away from it, not because they've evaluated it and decided it's best, because moving requires effort. And effort is a barrier. The default wins by inertia. The mechanism is status quo bias combined with decision fatigue. Changing the default means making a choice. Choices require mental energy. When energy is low, people stick with whatever's already set. The default becomes the path of least resistance. And most people follow the path of least resistance. It shows up in software constantly. Cookie consent forms default to I accept all. Most people click through without reading. Not because they want to share their data, because rejecting requires effort. The default is set. Changing it means navigating menace, unchecking boxes, reading fine print. Most people don't bother. The default wins. Organ donation rates follow this pattern. Countries where donation is opt-in have low rates. Countries where it's opt-out have high rates. The policy is the same. You can choose either way. But the default shapes the outcome. When donation is default, most people stay donors. When non-donation is default, most people stay non-donors. The choice is technically free. But the default dominates. Even simple settings have this power. Printers default to color. Most people print in color even when black and white would work. Not because color is necessary. Because changing the setting takes effort. The default persists. Email clients default to reply all. People accidentally spam entire teams. Not because they intended to. Because the default was set and they didn't change it. The default effect isn't about removing choice. It's about recognizing that the default is never neutral. Whatever is set as default will be chosen more often. Not because it's better, because it's easier, and easier wins. The power isn't in the options you provide. It's in which option you make the default. Contrast effect. You're shopping for a couch. You see one you like. It's priced at $1,200. Feels expensive. You're about to leave. Then the salesperson shows you another one, same size, same style, $4,000. Suddenly, the $1,200 couch feels reasonable. You buy it. The price didn't change. The context did. The contrast made the expensive seem affordable. Perception of value changes based on what it's compared to. That's the contrast effect, and it's why context controls judgment. You don't evaluate things in isolation. You evaluate them relative to what you've just seen. Show someone something expensive, and everything after it looks cheap. Show someone something terrible, and everything after it looks good. The object didn't change. The comparison did. And the comparison shifts perception. The mechanism is anchoring through comparison. Your brain needs a reference point. The first thing you see becomes that reference. Everything else gets judged relative to it. If the reference is high, your standards rise. If the reference is low, your standards drop. The contrast creates the frame, and the frame determines how you see what comes next. It shows up in hiring. Interview a weak candidate first. The next candidate, even if mediocre, looks strong by comparison. Interview a strong candidate first. Everyone after feels disappointing. The candidates didn't change. The sequence did. And the sequence created contrast that skewed judgment. Restaurants use this on menus. They list an extremely expensive dish first. Everything else looks affordable by comparison. You're not ordering the expensive dish. But it shifted your perception of what reasonable means. The contrast made you willing to spend more than you would have if that anchor wasn't there. Even simple experiences are shaped by contrast. A hotel room feels luxurious after a terrible flight. The same room would feel mediocre after a great one. The room didn't change. The contrast did. Your baseline shifted, and the shift changed your perception. Sales tactics weaponize this. A salesperson shows you the premium version first, loaded with features. Expensive. Then they show you the standard version. It feels like a bargain, not because it's cheap, because the contrast made it look cheap. The premium wasn't there to be sold. It was there to shift the frame. The contrast effect doesn't mean your perceptions are meaningless. It means they're relative. What feels expensive or cheap, good or bad, depends on what you've just experienced. Change the comparison and you change the judgment. The value doesn't shift. The context does. And context is everything. Framing effect. A doctor tells you about a surgery. This procedure has a 90% survival rate. You feel reassured. Another doctor describes the same surgery. This procedure has a 10% mortality rate. You feel anxious. The statistics are identical. The outcome is the same. But the framing changed your reaction. One emphasizes survival. The other emphasizes death. The frame shifted. Your feeling shifted with it. The way information is presented changes how people respond to it. That's the framing effect, and it's proof that facts aren't neutral. The same information, framed differently, produces different reactions. Not because people are irrational, because framing highlights different aspects of the same reality. And what gets highlighted shapes how you feel and what you choose. The mechanism is selective emphasis. Every frame highlights some information and obscures other information. A 90% survival rate emphasizes the positive. A 10% mortality rate emphasizes the negative. Both are true. Both are complete. But they guide attention differently. And attention shapes perception. It shows up in marketing constantly. A product is 90% fat-free instead of contains 10% fat. Same product. Different frame. The positive frame feels healthier. Even though the information is identical, the frame guides interpretation. And interpretation drives choice. Politics runs on this. A policy is framed as protecting jobs or limiting competition. Same policy. Different frames. One emphasizes security. The other emphasizes restriction. Voters respond to the frame. Not because they're ignoring facts. Because the frame tells them which facts matter. Even simple choices get framed. Save 15% feels better than avoid losing 15%. Mathematically identical. Psychologically different. Gains feel good. Losses feel bad. The frame determines which one you're thinking about. And that determines how you feel about the choice. Negotiations use framing deliberately. We're only 5% apart. Sounds better than we're still disagreeing on 5%. Same gap. Different frame. One emphasizes proximity. The other emphasizes distance. The frame shapes whether the gap feels bridgeable or insurmountable. The framing effect doesn't mean facts don't matter. It means presentation matters as much as content. The same truth, told two ways, can lead to opposite conclusions. Not because the truth changed, because the frame changed what part of the truth you focused on. And focus determines response. Law of diminishing returns. You hire your first employee. Productivity doubles. You hire a second. Productivity increases again. Not by as much, but still significant. You hire a third. The gain is smaller. A fourth. Even smaller. By the time you hire the 10th, each additional person barely moves the needle. You're still growing, but each addition contributes less than the one before. The first hire transformed the business. The 10th hire is just another body. Each additional unit of input produces less output than the previous one. That's the law of diminishing returns, and it's a fundamental constraint in almost every system. The first bit of effort produces big results. The second bit produces smaller results. The third, smaller still. You're not working less hard. You're just hitting the natural limits of what additional effort can achieve. The returns shrink. Not because you're doing it wrong, because that's how systems work. The mechanism is capacity saturation. Every system has constraints. When you're far from those constraints, adding resources helps a lot. When you're close to them, adding resources helps less. The first watering of a dry plant revives it. The 10th watering does nothing. The plant already has enough water. More input doesn't produce more output. It just gets wasted. It shows up in studying. The first hour of study helps a lot. The second hour helps. The third hour helps less. By the 5th hour, you're not retaining much. Not because studying is useless, because your brain has limits. The early hours are productive. The later hours hit diminishing returns. More time doesn't mean more learning. It just means more fatigue. Businesses hit this constantly. Early investment in marketing produces big gains. Later investment produces smaller gains. The easiest customers are already reaped. The remaining ones are harder to convert. Each additional dollar spent generates less revenue than the previous dollar. The returns diminish. Not because the strategy failed, because the low-hanging fruit is gone. Even exercise follows this. The first month of training produces dramatic gains. Strength increases. Endurance improves. The second month produces gains, but smaller ones. The third month, smaller still. Eventually, progress plateaus. Not because you're not training hard, because you're approaching your natural limits. The returns on effort shrink. Agriculture is the classic example. Add fertilizer to poor soil. Yields jump. Add more. Yields increase again. Keep adding. Eventually, yields stop increasing. The soil is saturated. More fertilizer doesn't help. It just runs off. The first applications produced returns. The later ones produced waste. The law of diminishing returns doesn't mean more is always bad. It means more stops being worth it at some point. The first units of input are the most valuable. The later units are less valuable, and eventually, adding more costs more than it's worth. Knowing when to stop is the skill. Because past a certain point, more effort just means more waste. Tragedy of the commons. A village shares a pasture. Everyone can graze their animals there. Free access. No limits. Each farmer thinks, if I add one more cow, I benefit. The cost of overgrazing gets shared by everyone. So they add another cow. Every farmer thinks the same way. Every farmer adds another cow. The pasture gets overgrazed. The grass dies. Now no one can use it. Everyone acted in their own interest. The commons collapsed. Individual self-interest destroys shared resources. That's the tragedy of the commons, and it's a structural problem. No individual caused it. Everyone made a rational choice. But the collective result was disaster. The commons wasn't destroyed by malice or stupidity. It was destroyed by the logic of individual incentives conflicting with collective good. Each person's benefit was private. The cost was shared. So everyone took more than the system could sustain. The mechanism is misaligned incentives. When a resource is shared, the benefits of using it are individual. But the costs of overuse are collective. That asymmetry creates a problem. Each person gains fully from their own use, but they only bear a fraction of the cost of overuse. So individually, it makes sense to use more. Collectively, it leads to collapse. It shows up in fisheries. The ocean is a commons. Each fishing company benefits from catching more fish. The cost of depleting the stock gets shared by all companies. So every company overfishes. The stock collapses. Now no one can fish. The ocean was a shared resource. Individual incentives destroyed it. Pollution follows the same pattern. A factory dumps waste into a river. The factory saves money. The cost of pollution gets shared by everyone downstream. Every factory makes the same calculation. Every factory pollutes. The river dies. No one intended to kill the river, but the structure of incentives made it inevitable. Even traffic operates this way. Everyone wants to drive. Each car adds a small amount of congestion. The benefit of driving is individual. The cost of congestion is shared. So everyone drives. Traffic becomes unbearable. The road is a commons. Individual choices destroyed its usefulness. Office kitchens are a microcosm of this. Everyone uses the shared coffee. No one wants to make a new pot. Each person benefits from drinking the last cup. The cost of having no coffee gets shared. So people take the last cup without making more. The commons runs out. Individual logic. Collective failure. The tragedy of the commons doesn't mean people are selfish. It means incentives are misaligned. When benefits are private and costs are shared, overuse is rational. And rational individual behavior can produce irrational collective outcomes. The tragedy isn't that people are greedy. It's that the structure makes greed the logical choice. And logic, unchecked, destroys the resource everyone depends on. Survivorship bias. You look at successful entrepreneurs. They all dropped out of college, took massive risks, ignored conventional advice. The lesson seems clear. Follow their path. Drop out. Take risks. Ignore the doubters. But you're only seeing the survivors. For every dropout who built $1 billion company, there are thousands who failed and disappeared. You don't see them. They're not on magazine covers. They're not giving TED Talks. The survivors are visible. The failures are invisible. And the invisibility creates a distorted picture. You only see what survived, not what didn't. That's survivorship bias, and it's everywhere. The data you have is incomplete. Not because someone hid the failures, because failures don't stick around to be counted. They drop out of sight. The winners remain visible. And when you only see winners, you assume their strategy works. You don't see everyone else who tried the same thing and failed. The sample is biased. And the bias makes bad strategies look good. The mechanism is visibility filtering. Success makes you visible. Failure makes you disappear. When you analyze only what's visible, you're analyzing a filtered sample. The filtering removes the failures. What remains looks like a pattern, but it's not a pattern. It's selection. The strategy didn't work for most people who tried it. You just don't see them anymore. The classic example is World War II aircraft. Engineers studied planes returning from missions. They wanted to add armor. The returning planes had bullet holes in the wings and fuselage. So they planned to reinforce those areas. A statistician pointed out the problem. The planes they were studying survived. The bullet holes they saw were in non-critical areas. The planes hit in critical areas didn't come back. They should reinforce where there were no holes. Because that's where hits were fatal. Survivorship bias almost led them to armor the wrong spots. It shows up in business advice constantly. Here's what successful companies did, but you're not seeing what unsuccessful companies did. Maybe they did the same things. Maybe the difference wasn't strategy. Maybe it was luck, timing, market conditions. The successful companies survived. The unsuccessful ones closed. The bias makes you think the survivor's strategy caused success, when often it was just one of many strategies, and most who tried it failed. Even investing suffers from this. Mutual funds advertise their high-performing funds. The low-performing funds get quietly closed. The track record looks great, but it's incomplete. The failures were removed from the sample. What you see is the survivors, not the full picture. Self-help follows the same pattern. I succeeded by doing X poor, but thousands of others did X and didn't succeed. You don't hear from them. They're not writing books. The survivorship bias makes X look like the answer, when really, X was tried by many. Most failed. A few succeeded. And the few who succeeded are the only ones you hear from. Survivorship bias doesn't mean success stories are lies. It means they're incomplete. The strategy might have worked for them, but you're not seeing everyone it didn't work for. The failures are filtered out. And without seeing the failures, you can't assess the real odds. You're making decisions based on survivors, and survivors are a biased sample. Availability heuristic. A plane crashes. The news covers it for days. Suddenly, flying feels dangerous. You consider driving instead. But driving is far more dangerous. Thousands die in car accidents every year. Plane crashes are rare, but the plane crash is vivid, recent, easy to recall. So it feels more likely. The availability of the memory distorts the perception of risk. Flying didn't get more dangerous. Your sense of danger just got hijacked by what's easy to remember. You judge likelihood by how easily examples come to mind. That's the availability heuristic, and it warps risk assessment constantly. The easier something is to recall, the more likely it feels. Not because it is more likely, because your brain uses recall as a proxy for frequency. Vivid events, recent events, emotionally charged events, these stick in memory. And when they're easy to retrieve, your brain assumes they're common. The assumption is wrong, but it feels right. The mechanism is mental shortcuts. Estimating actual probabilities is hard. Your brain doesn't have time to calculate statistics, so it shortcuts. It asks, can I think of examples? If examples come easily, the brain assumes it's common. If examples are hard to think of, the brain assumes it's rare. The shortcut works often enough, but it fails when memorable events are rare or common events are forgettable. It shows up in fear constantly. Shark attacks are incredibly rare, but they're vivid, dramatic, easy to remember. So people fear sharks more than they should. Meanwhile, heart disease kills far more people. But it's not dramatic. It's not sudden. It doesn't make for compelling stories. So it feels less threatening. The availability heuristic makes rare, vivid risks feel bigger than common, mundane ones. Even hiring suffers from this. An interviewer remembers one terrible hire who had a certain background. Now everyone from that background feels risky. The one bad experience is vivid, easy to recall, so it feels representative. But one example isn't data. The heuristic makes a single vivid memory outweigh actual statistics. Media amplifies this effect. Terrorism gets massive coverage. It's dramatic, visceral, easy to remember, so it feels like a major threat. Statistically, you're far more likely to die from falling in your own home, but falls aren't newsworthy. They don't get coverage, so they don't feel dangerous. The heuristic makes you overestimate dramatic risks and underestimate boring ones. Advertising exploits this. Brands create memorable ads. Vivid, emotional, funny. The memorability makes the brand feel more common. When you're choosing a product, the brand that comes to mind easily feels like the safe choice. Not because it's better, because it's available in memory. And availability feels like popularity. The availability heuristic isn't always wrong. Sometimes things are easy to remember because they're common. But just as often, they're easy to remember because they're dramatic, recent, or emotionally charged. And when you're using ease of recall to judge likelihood, you're letting memory bias reality. The vivid, rare event feels more likely than the common, boring one. And decisions follow the feeling, not the facts. Confirmation bias. You believe something. You scroll through social media. Articles that support your view catch your attention. You read them. Share them. Articles that contradict your view get scrolled past. You don't even notice them. Or if you do, you dismiss them. Biased source. Flawed study. Missing context. The evidence that confirms your belief feels solid. The evidence that challenges it feels weak. You're not seeking truth. You're seeking confirmation. And you're finding it. Because you're only looking for it in one direction. You favor information that confirms what you already believe. That's confirmation bias, and it's one of the most persistent cognitive traps. Once you hold a belief, you start filtering information to support it. Not consciously. Not deliberately. Your brain just prioritizes information that fits, and downplays information that doesn't. The confirmation feels like validation. The contradiction feels like noise. And over time, your belief gets stronger. Not because the evidence got better, because you stopped seeing evidence against it. The mechanism is selective attention and interpretation. Your brain can't process everything, so it filters. When you already believe something, confirming information gets flagged as important. Contradicting information gets flagged as irrelevant or flawed. You're not evaluating evidence neutrally. You're evaluating it through the lens of your existing belief. And that lens tilts everything toward confirmation. It shows up in politics constantly. People consume news that aligns with their views. When they encounter opposing views, they find reasons to dismiss them. The source is biased. The logic is flawed. The facts are cherry-picked. But when their own side presents information, those same flaws get overlooked. The standard for acceptance depends on whether the information confirms or contradicts. Confirmation gets a pass. Contradiction gets scrutinized. Even science isn't immune. Researchers who expect a certain result are more likely to find it. Not because they fake data, because they interpret ambiguous results in line with their hypothesis. They notice data that supports their theory. They discount data that doesn't. The bias operates unconsciously. The result is studies that confirm what the researcher already believed. Relationships follow this pattern too. If you believe your partner is trustworthy, you interpret ambiguous behavior charitably. If you believe they're untrustworthy, the same behavior looks suspicious. The behavior didn't change. Your belief did. And the belief filters how you see everything that follows. Investing gets destroyed by this. An investor believes a stock will rise. Every piece of news gets interpreted as bullish. Bad earnings, temporary setback, management shakeup, positive change. The bias makes them hold on to losing positions far longer than they should. Because they're only seeing evidence that supports holding. The contradicting evidence gets filtered out. Confirmation bias doesn't mean you're stupid. It means your brain is efficient. Filtering is necessary. You can't evaluate everything from scratch. But efficiency comes at a cost. The cost is that once you believe something, you stop testing it. You start defending it. And defending it means seeking confirmation, not truth. The belief becomes self-reinforcing, and the reinforcement makes it feel more true, even when it's not. Cognitive dissonance. You buy an expensive car. Right after you start feeling uneasy. Did you overspend? Could you have gotten better value elsewhere? The doubt is uncomfortable, so your brain resolves it. You start focusing on everything great about the car, the handling, the features, the status. You downplay the cost. You ignore the alternatives. You convince yourself it was the right choice. Not because new evidence appeared, because the dissonance between the purchase and the doubt was unbearable. Your brain needed consistency, so it adjusted your beliefs to match your actions. Holding contradictory beliefs creates discomfort. The mind resolves it by changing one of the beliefs. That's cognitive dissonance, and it's why people rationalize. When your actions and beliefs conflict, the tension is psychological. You can't undo the action, so you adjust the belief. The adjustment isn't conscious. It's automatic. Your brain smooths over the contradiction. And once it's smoothed, the dissonance disappears. You feel consistent again. Even if the consistency required rewriting reality, the mechanism is discomfort reduction. Contradictions feel bad. Your brain wants coherence. When you act in a way that conflicts with your beliefs, something has to give. The action already happened. The belief is easier to change. So the belief shifts. And the shift feels like insight. But it's not insight. It's rationalization. The brain is making the story fit the action, not the other way around. It shows up after major decisions constantly. Someone quits a stable job for a risky venture. Doubt creeps in. Did they make a mistake? The dissonance is painful, so they start emphasizing why the old job was terrible. Toxic culture. No growth. Dead end. They're not discovering new flaws. They're inventing them. Because the dissonance between quitting and doubt requires resolution. And criticizing the old job resolves it. Even harmful behaviors get rationalized this way. Someone smokes. They know it's bad for them. The dissonance between smoking and knowing it's harmful is uncomfortable. So they adjust the belief. My grandfather smoked and lived to 90. Stress is worse than smoking. I'll quit eventually. The rationalizations reduce dissonance. They don't reduce harm, but they make the behavior feel acceptable. And acceptable is all the brain needs. Relationships are full of this. You invest years in someone. The relationship isn't working. But leaving means admitting the investment was wasted. That's dissonance. So you convince yourself it's not that bad. They have good qualities. Every relationship has problems. Things will improve. The rationalizations keep you in. Not because the relationship improved. Because leaving would create unbearable dissonance. Cults exploit this. They make members do things that conflict with their values. Small things at first, then bigger. Each action creates dissonance. And to resolve it, members adjust their beliefs. I must believe this. Otherwise, why would I have done it? The actions change the beliefs, not the other way around. And each change makes leaving harder, because leaving means admitting all the previous actions were wrong. The dissonance would be crushing. So they stay and rationalize. Cognitive dissonance doesn't mean people are dishonest. It means the mind prioritizes coherence over truth. Contradictions are painful. Resolution is automatic. And resolution often means bending reality to fit behavior. The rationalizations feel true, because they solved the dissonance. But solving dissonance isn't the same as finding truth. It's just making yourself feel consistent, even when consistency requires lying to yourself. Status quo bias. A better health insurance plan is available. Lower cost. Better coverage. Switching requires filling out a form. It takes 10 minutes. You don't do it. Months pass. You stay with the worst plan. Not because you prefer it, because switching requires action. And action feels harder than staying. The current situation is familiar. The new situation is unknown. Even when the new situation is objectively better, the default wins. Not through logic, through inertia. People prefer things to stay the same. That's status quo bias, and it's why change is hard even when change is clearly beneficial. The current state feels safe, familiar, predictable. Changing means uncertainty, risk, effort. So people stick with what they have. Not because they've evaluated the alternatives and chosen, because choosing requires deciding. And not deciding is easier. The status quo wins by default. The mechanism is loss aversion and effort avoidance. Change means giving up the current state. Even if the current state is bad, it's known. The new state is unknown. And unknown feels risky. Your brain weighs potential losses more heavily than potential gains. So staying put feels safer than moving, even when moving is the better choice. It shows up in careers constantly. People stay in jobs they hate. Better opportunities exist. They know it. But switching means interviews, uncertainty, risk. Staying is familiar, so they stay. Year after year, the status quo isn't good, but changing feels harder than enduring. Even technology adoption follows this. A better tool exists, faster, more efficient, but learning it takes time. The old tool is familiar, so people keep using it, even when the new tool would save them hours every week. The learning curve feels like a cost. The status quo feels free, so the status quo persists. Voting behavior runs on this. Incumbents have an advantage, not because they're better, because they're the current state. Voters know them. Switching to a challenger feels risky. The unknown feels worse than the disappointing known, so incumbents win, even when approval ratings are low. The status quo bias favors whoever's already in place. Relationships suffer from this too. People stay in mediocre partnerships, not because they're happy, because leaving is hard, uncertain. The current relationship is familiar. Leaving means starting over. The status quo feels easier, so they stay. The relationship doesn't improve, but improving would require change. And change feels harder than staying. Even investment portfolios get locked in. People hold on to allocations they set years ago. The market changed. The goals changed. But relocating means deciding. Deciding takes effort, so the old allocation stays. The status quo persists, not because it's optimal, because change requires action, and action is work. Status quo bias doesn't mean people are lazy. It means change carries psychological costs that staying doesn't. Effort, risk, uncertainty, loss of the familiar. Those costs feel real, even when staying is objectively worse. The bias makes the current state the default winner. And defaults are incredibly hard to overcome, even when the alternative is clearly better. Boomerang Effect. A public health campaign tells teenagers not to smoke. The message is clear. Smoking is dangerous. Don't do it. Teen smoking rates increase. The campaign backfired. Why? Because telling people not to do something can make them want to do it more, especially when the message feels like control. The psychological resistance kicks in. You're telling me what to do. I'll show you. The intent was to reduce smoking. The effect was to increase it. The message boomeranged. Persuasion attempts can produce the opposite of the intended effect. That's the boomerang effect, and it's a warning about heavy-handed messaging. When people feel pressured, controlled, or restricted, they push back. Not always consciously. But the resistance is real, and sometimes the resistance is stronger than the original intent. The harder you push, the harder they push back. The message doesn't just fail. It reverses. The mechanism is reactance. People value autonomy. When they feel their freedom is threatened, they react by asserting it. Telling someone not to do something can make that thing feel more appealing. Not because it is appealing, because choosing it becomes an act of defiance. A way to reclaim control. The restriction creates the desire, and the desire drives behavior opposite to the intended direction. It shows up in parenting constantly. Tell a child not to touch something. Now they want to touch it. The restriction made it interesting. The more forcefully you prohibit, the more attractive it becomes. The intent was to protect. The effect was to provoke. Political campaigns experience this too. Attack ads meant to discredit a candidate sometimes boost them instead. The attacks make them seem important. Dangerous. Worth paying attention to, especially if the attacks feel unfair or exaggerated. The target of the attack gains sympathy. Support increases. The ad boomeranged. Even health messaging can backfire. Tell people they're at risk, and some people double down on the risky behavior. Not because they don't understand the risk, because acknowledging it feels like admitting weakness or losing control. The message triggered defensiveness, and defensiveness produces resistance. The opposite of the intended behavior. Censorship often boomerangs. Ban a book and sales skyrocket. People who weren't interested suddenly want to read it. Not because the content changed, because the ban made it forbidden. And forbidden feels valuable. The attempt to suppress created demand. The Streisand Effect is a cousin of this. But the Boomerang Effect is broader. It's any time persuasion reverses. The effect doesn't mean you should never try to persuade. It means force and control often backfire. The harder the push, the stronger the resistance. Subtle influence works better than overt pressure. Frame choices as freedom, not restriction. Give people autonomy. Let them feel like they're deciding, because the moment it feels like control, resistance kicks in. And resistance doesn't care about logic. It just pushes back. The Boomerang Effect is a reminder that persuasion isn't about force. It's about navigation. Push too hard and people resist. Not because your argument is wrong, because the push felt like an attack on their autonomy. And autonomy, once threatened, fights back. Sometimes harder than the original push. The message boomerangs. And the result is the opposite of what you wanted.